last of the book. Professor Openshaw was a man of science. It was his pride to have given his whole life to studying psychic phenomenon. He always lost his temper if anybody said that he believed in ghosts, but he also lost his temper if anyone said that ghosts did not exist. "I am a man of science," he said one morning to Father Brown, who was a friend of his. They were standing on the steps outside the hotel, where both had been breakfasting that morning and sleeping the night before. The professor had come back rather late from one of his experiments. "I'm trying," he continued, "to explain psychic phenomenon scientifically. I've been working on this problem for a long time. I think a lot of psychic appearances can be explained scientifically, but cases of disappearance of people are much more difficult to explain. These people in the newspapers who vanish and are never found, if you knew the details as I do. Only this morning I have received an extraordinary letter from an old missionary, quite a respectable old boy. He's coming to see me at my office this morning. Perhaps you'd lunch with me or something, and I'd tell you the results." "Thanks, I shall," said Father Brown. They said goodbye to each other, and the professor walked around the corner to his small office, which he used for the publication of his scientific reports. He had only one clerk, a man named Berridge, who was at a desk in the outer office working at some calculations for the professor's report. The professor paused to ask Mr. Pringle had called. The clerk answered mechanically in the negative and went on mechanically adding up figures. The professor turned towards his study. "Oh, by the way, Berridge," he said without turning round, "if Mr. Pringle comes, send him straight to me. Go on with your work. I should like to have those notes for my report finished tonight, if possible. You may leave them on my desk tomorrow if I am late." And he went into his study, still thinking of the problem which the letter from Pringle had raised. He sat down in his large and comfortable chair and read once more the short letter from Pringle. In this letter, Mr. Pringle asked permission to come and see the professor about some curious cases of disappearance of people. He knew that the professor was interested in psychic problems. The professor was surprised when he looked up and saw that the missionary was already in the room. "Your clerk told me I was to come straight in," said Mr. Pringle apologetically, but with a broad grin. The grin was almost lost in a thick, reddish-grey beard and whiskers that covered the missionary's face. He had a snub nose and frank, friendly eyes. Openshaw was a man of great detective ability. He could always tell at once if a man was honest or a humbug. He looked with great attention at his visitor, trying to see what sort of man Mr. Pringle was. He could not find anything suspicious about his appearance. In fact, he liked the friendly laughter in Mr. Pringle's eyes, laughter which is never found in the eyes of real humbugs. "You probably think," said Mr. Pringle, "I'm playing a joke on you, Professor. All the same, I must tell my story to somebody who knows, because it's true. And all joking apart, it's tragic as well as true. Well, to cut it short, I was a missionary in a small station in West Africa, in the thick of the forests. The only other white man there was the officer in command of the district, Captain Wales. He and I were very friendly soon. One day he came back to his tent in the forest after a short leave and said he wanted to tell me something. He was holding an old book in a leather binding, and he put it down on the table beside his revolver and an old Arab sword he had. He said this book had belonged to a man on the boat which he had just come off. That man had told him that nobody must open the book, or even look inside it. If anybody did, he would be carried off by the devil or disappear. Wales said to the man that this was all nonsense, of course, and they had a quarrel. The end of the story was very strange. Captain Wales said that the man did not look into the book, and then dropped it and walked to the side of the boat. "One moment," said the professor. "Who had made one or two notes? Before you tell me anything else, did the man tell Wales where he had got the book, or who it belonged to?" "Yes," replied Pringle, now quite serious. "It seems he said he was bringing it back to Dr. Hankey, the Oriental traveller, now in England, to whom the book belonged, and who had warned the man about the book. The magic of the book was demonstrated when the man who had looked into it walked straight over the side of the ship and was never seen again." "Do you believe it yourself?" asked Openshaw after a pause. "Well, I do," replied Pringle. "I believe it for two reasons. First, that Wales was a very truthful man. He said that the man had walked straight over the side on a still and calm day, but there had been no splash. The professor looked at his notes for some seconds in silence, and then said, "And your other reason for believing it?" "My other reason," answered Mr. Pringle, "is what I saw myself." There was another silence until he continued again. "I told you that Captain Wales had put down the book on the table beside the sword. There was only one entrance to the tent, and it happened that I was standing in it, looking out into the forest with my back to my companion. He was standing by the table, grumbling that it was all nonsense, and that it was foolish in the 20th century to be frightened of opening a book, asking why the devil he couldn't open it himself. Then some instinct made me tell him that he had better not do that. The book had better be returned to Dr. Hankey. What harm could it do, he asked restlessly. What harm did it do? I answered him. What happened to your friend on the boat? He did not answer. Indeed, I did not know what he could answer. If it comes to that, I continued, what is your explanation of what really happened on the boat? Still, he did not answer, and I looked round and saw that he wasn't there. The tent was empty. The book was lying on the table, open, but on its face, as if he had turned it downwards. But the sword was lying on the ground near the other side of the tent, and there was a great hole in the canvas of the tent, as if somebody had cut his way out with the sword. I have never seen or heard of Captain Wales from that day. I wrapped the book up in brown paper, taking good care not to look at it, and I brought it back to England, intending at first to return it to Dr. Hankey. Then I saw a report in your paper suggesting a hypothesis about such things, and I decided to stop on the way and put the matter before you. Professor Openshaw laid down his pen and looked attentively at the man on the other side of the table. He had met many different types of humbugs, and even some eccentric and extraordinary types of honest men. In the ordinary way, he would have begun with the healthy hypothesis that the story was a pack of lies. Yes, the best hypothesis would be to say that the story was a pack of lies. And yet, he could not make himself believe that the man was simply a liar. The man was not trying to look honest, as most humbugs do. It seemed that he was honest in spite of the queerness of the story. "Mr. Pringle," said the professor sharply, "where is the book now?" The grin reappeared on the bearded face, which had become quite serious during the recital of the story. "I left it outside," said Mr. Pringle. "I mean in the outer office. It was a risk, perhaps, but the less risk of the two." "What do you mean?" demanded the professor. "Why didn't you bring it straight in here?" "Because," answered the missionary, "I knew that as soon as you saw it, you would open it before you and heard the story. I thought it possible you might think twice about opening after you'd heard the story." Then, after a silence, he added, "There was nobody out there, only your clerk, and he looked a dull, honest man, busy with his calculations." "Oh, Berridge," laughed the professor, "your magic book is safe enough with him, I'm quite sure. He is just a calculating machine. Human beings like him, if you can call him a human being, would never think of opening other people's brown paper parcel. Let's go and get the book now. I'll tell you frankly that I'm not quite sure whether we ought to open it here, or now, or send it to Dr. Hankley." The two had passed together out of the professor's study into the outer office, and even as they did so, Mr. Pringle gave a cry and ran forward towards the clerk's desk. For the clerk's desk was there, but not the clerk. On the clerk's desk lay an old leather-bound book. It was lying closed, but as if it had just been opened. The clerk's desk stood against the wide window that looked out into the street, and the window was broken. The large hole in the glass looked as if a human body had just passed through it. There was no other trace of Mr. Berridge. The two men stood as still as statues, and then it was the professor who slowly came to life. He turned and held out his hand to the missionary. "Mr. Pringle," he said, "I beg your pardon. I beg your pardon only for thoughts that I have had. But nobody could call himself a scientific man and not face a fact like this. I suppose," said Mr. Pringle, "that we should ring up his house and find out if he has gone home." "I don't know if he's on the phone," answered Openshaw. "He lives somewhere up Hampstead way, I think. But I suppose somebody will ask him here, if his friends or family miss him." "Could we give a description of him if the police want it?" asked the other. "The police," said the professor. "A description? Well, he looked just like everybody else. He wore glasses, one of those clean-shaven fellows. But the police... Look here, what are we to do about this mad business?" "I know what I ought to do," said the missionary firmly. "I'm going to take this book to Dr. Hankey and ask him what the devil it's all about. He lives not very far from here, and I'll come straight back and tell you what he will say." "Oh, very well," said the professor at last, as he sat down. He was tired, and long after the quick footsteps of the missionary had died away down the street outside, the professor sat in the same position, staring at the wall and thinking hard. He was still in the same seat and almost in the same position when the same quick steps were heard in the street outside, and the missionary entered, this time with empty hands. "Dr. Hankey," said Mr. Pringle, "wants to keep the book for an hour and think over the matter. Then he asked us both to call on him, and he will give his decision. He very much desired, Professor, that you should accompany me on the second visit." Openshaw continued to stare in silence. Then he said suddenly, "Who the devil is Dr. Hankey?" "Do you mean, is he the devil?" asked Pringle, smiling. "I am sure some people have thought so. He's a scientific man like you. He has lived in India for a long time and studied magic there, so perhaps he is not so well known here. He's a thin, yellow-faced man with a lame leg, and he loses his temper very easily. Still, I don't know anything definitely wrong about him." Professor Openshaw rose heavily and went to the telephone. He rang up Father Brown and invited him to come to dinner instead of lunch. After that, he sat down again, lit a cigar, and concentrated his mind once more on the strange case. Father Brown waited in the vestibule of the restaurant to which he had been invited by the professor. He waited there for quite a long time. At last Openshaw and Pringle appeared, and it was clear that the professor was terribly excited by the strange things he had just seen and heard. They had found Dr. Hankey's house. They had found on the door a brass plate with the name J.D. Hankey, M.D. Only they did not find J.D. Hankey himself. What they did find was that terrible book lying on the table in the parlour, as if it had just been read. They also found a back door wide open and a few footmarks on the ground. It was a lame man that had run out of the house. It was clear from the footmarks themselves. There were only a few of them, and then nothing. There was nothing else to be learnt from Dr. J.D. Hankey, except that he had made his decision. He had read the book and received the punishment. Then the two came into the entrance under the palms. Pringle put the book down suddenly on a table, as if it burned his fingers. The priest glanced at it curiously. On the front page there was a couplet. "They that looked into this book, them the flying terror took." Under these lines were the translations of the couplet into Greek, Latin, and French. Openshaw called to the waiter, and he brought cocktails to them. "Will you dine with us, I hope?" said the professor to the missionary, but Mr. Pringle shook his head. "If you'll forgive me," he said, "I'm going to have to think over this whole business. Could I use your office for an hour or so?" "I suppose. I'm afraid it's locked," said Openshaw in some surprise. "You forget there's a hole in the window," said the missionary. He gave the very broadest of all his broad grins and vanished into the darkness outside. "A rather odd fellow," said the professor. When he turned to Father Brown, he was rather surprised to find him talking to the waiter who had brought the cocktails. The talk was about the waiter's baby, who had been ill and was out of danger now. "How did you come to know the man?" asked the professor. "Oh, I dine here every 2 or 3 months, and I've talked to him now and then," was the answer. The professor, who himself dined there about 5 times a week, had never even thought of talking to the waiter. At this moment, a telephone was heard ringing, and a few seconds later the professor was called to it. The voice on the telephone said it was Pringle. "Professor," said the voice, "I can't stand it any longer. I'm going to look into the book for myself. I'm speaking from your office, and the book is in front of me. If anything happens to me, this is to say goodbye. Nope, it's no use trying to stop me. You wouldn't be in time. I'm opening the book now. Openshaw thought he heard something like a crash. Then he shouted the name of Pringle again and again, but he heard no more. He hung up the receiver, went back, and quietly took his seat at the dinner table. Then, as calmly as he could, he told the priest every detail of this monstrous mystery. 5 men have disappeared in this impossible way, he said. Every case is extraordinary, but the most extraordinary is the case of my clerk, Berridge. It's just because he was one of the quietest creatures that his case is the queerest one. Yes, replied Father Brown, it was a queer thing for Berridge to do. He was always so careful to keep all the office business separate from any fun of his own. Why, I'm sure nobody knew he was quite a humorist at home, and... Berridge, cried the professor. What on earth are you talking about? Did you know him? Oh, no, said Father Brown carelessly. Only, as I know the waiter, I've often had to wait in your office, and of course I talked to him. He was rather a character, and even eccentric, I should say. I'm not sure what you're talking about, said Openshaw. But even if my clerk was eccentric, and I've never known a man who would be less eccentric than Berridge, It doesn't explain what happened to him, and it certainly can't explain the other cases of disappearance." "What other cases?" asked the priest. The professor stared at him and spoke slowly and loudly as if to a child. "My dear Father Brown, 5 men have disappeared." "My dear Professor Openshaw, no men have disappeared." Father Brown stared back at the professor and spoke as slowly and as loudly. "I say that no men have disappeared," he repeated. After a moment's silence, he added, "I suppose the hardest thing is to prove that 0 plus 0 plus 0 equals 0. Men believe the oddest things sometimes, but in your case there is a very weak point." "What do you mean?" "You saw nobody vanish. You did not see the man vanish from the boat. You did not see the man vanish from the tent. You have simply taken the word of Mr. Pringle, and I'm sure you would never have taken his word if your clerk had not disappeared." "That may be true," said the professor slowly. "You say I saw nothing myself, but I did. I saw my own clerk disappear. Berridge did disappear." "Berridge did not disappear," said Father Brown. "On the contrary." "What the devil do you mean by on the contrary?" "I mean," said Father Brown, "that he never disappeared. He appeared." Openshaw stared across at his friend, but the priest went on. "He appeared in your study, disguised in a thick red beard, and introduced himself as Missionary Pringle. And you had never noticed your own clerk enough to recognize him when he was in so rough and ready a disguise." "But listen," began the professor. "Could you describe him to the police?" asked Father Brown. "Not you. You knew perhaps that he was clean-shaven and wore glasses. Taking off those glasses was a better disguise than putting on anything else. You had never seen his eyes, his laughing eyes. He had put his absurd book on the table in your office. Then he calmly broke the window, put on the beard, and walked into your study, knowing very well that you had never looked at him in your life." "But why should he have played such a mad trick on me?" demanded Openshaw. "Why? Because you had never looked at him in your life," said Father Brown. "You called him the calculating machine, because that was all you ever used him for. You never found out that he was a character, that he had his own views on you and your theories. You thought you could see through anybody. Can't you see his mad desire to prove that you could not see through your own clerk? Don't you know the story of the woman who bought 2 most useless things, an old doctor's brass plate and a wooden leg? With those 2 things your clerk created the character of Dr. Hankey. He did it as easily as he created the character of Captain Wales. He placed the brass plate with the name of Dr. Hankey on the door of his own house." "Do you mean that the place we visited at Hampstead Road was Berridge's own house?" asked Openshaw. "Did you know his house, or even his address?" said the priest. "Look here, I think highly of you and your work. You have seen through a lot of liars. But don't only look at liars. Sometimes do look at honest men, like the waiter." "Where is Berridge now?" asked the professor after a long silence. "I haven't the least doubt," said Father Brown, "that he is back in your office. In fact, he came back into your office at the exact moment when Mr. Pringle read the awful book and disappeared." There was another long silence, and then Professor Openshaw laughed. He laughed with the laugh of a great man who is great enough to look small. Then he said, "I suppose I do deserve it, for not noticing the nearest helpers I have. But don't you think that all these incidents coming one after the other could frighten anybody? Did you never feel, just for a moment only, that you were frightened of that awful book?" "Oh, that," said Father Brown. "I opened the book as soon as I saw it lying there. It's all blank pages." That little square box. "All aboard?" asked the captain. "All aboard, sir," said the mate. "Then stand by to let her go." It was 9 o'clock on Wednesday morning. Everything was prepared for a start. The whistle had sounded twice. The final bell had rung. The bow was turned toward England, and all was ready for Spartan's run of 3,000 miles. "Time is up," said the captain, closing his chronometer and putting it in his pocket. Suddenly there was a shout from the bridge, and 2 men appeared, running very quickly down the quay. It was clear they were hurrying to the ship and wanted to stop her, "Look sharp," shouted the people on the quay. "Ease her, stop her," cried the captain. The two men jumped aboard at the last moment, and the ship left the shore quickly. The people on the quay shouted with excitement. So did the passengers. They were all glad that the two men had got on. I went round the deck, looking at the faces of my fellow passengers. I found nothing interesting. 20 types of young Americans going to Europe, a few respectable middle-aged couples, some young ladies. I turned away from them and looked back at the shores of America. I wanted to be alone. So I found a place behind a pile of suitcases and sat down on a coil of rope. I enjoyed being alone. A few minutes passed. Then I heard a whisper behind me. "Here's a quiet place," said a voice. "Sit down and we can talk it over. Nobody can overhear us here." The pile of suitcases was between the men and myself. Looking through a chink between the big suitcases, I saw that they were the passengers who had joined us at the last moment. I was sure they did not see me. The one who had spoken was a tall, thin man with a blue-black beard and a colourless face. His companion was a short fellow. He had a cigar in his mouth and a coat hung over his arm. They both looked around them as if they were afraid that they were being watched. "This is just the place," I heard the other say. They sat down and their backs were turned towards me. I found myself, against my wish, playing an unpleasant part of eavesdropper. "Well, Muller," said the taller of the two, "we've brought it aboard all right." "Yes," agreed the man whom he had addressed as Muller. "It's safe aboard. But we were running a terrible risk." "Yes, we were, Flanagan," said Muller. "It would have been horrible if we had missed the ship," said Flanagan. "Yes, it would," said Muller. "It would have upset our plans." For some time the little man smoked his cigar in silence. "I've got it here," he said at last. "Let me see it," said Flanagan. "Is no one looking?" asked Muller. "No, they are all below." "We must be very careful, of course," said Muller. He raised the coat that was hanging over his left arm, and I saw a dark box which he had laid on the deck. One look at it was enough to make me jump to my feet in horror. If they had turned their heads, they would have seen my pale face looking at them over the pile of suitcases. From the first moment of their conversation, I had a horrible feeling of danger. Now I was sure that I was right. I looked hard at what lay before me. It was a little square box of some dark wood. It looked like a pistol case, only it was much higher. There was a trigger-like arrangement on the lid of the box, and a coil of string was tied to it. Near the trigger was a small square hole in the wood. The tall man, Flanagan, as his companion had called him, looked through the hole for several minutes. "It seems all right," he said at last. "I tried not to shake it," said the companion. "One must be very careful with such things, but in what's necessary," said Flanagan. Then the shorter man took from his pocket a small paper package, opened it, took out some white granules, and dropped them through the hole. A funny clicking noise was heard from the box. Both men smiled. They were pleased. "Everything seems all right there," said Flanagan. "Yes, everything is going fine," answered his companion. "Look out, there's someone coming. Take it down to our berth. Nobody should know what our plans are. It will be very bad for us if anybody finds out about them, and it will be still worse if anyone pulls the trigger by mistake. He will be terribly shocked," said the taller man with a laugh. "It's not badly done, eh?" "Is it your own design?" asked Muller. "Yes, it is," was the answer. "We should take out a patent," and the two men laughed again with a cold laugh as they took up the little box and put it under Muller's coat. "Let's go down and hide it in our berth," said Flanagan. "We shall not need it until tonight, and it will be safe there." His companion agreed. They went arm in arm along the deck. The last words I heard from Flanagan, who was telling Muller to carry the box carefully and not to knock it against the sides of the ship. How long I stayed there, sitting on the coil of rope, I do not remember. I was shaken by the words which I had overheard. Everything seemed to fit in perfectly well. The two passengers' suitcases were not examined because they had come aboard in a hurry. Their strange manner and secret whispering, the little square box with the trigger, their joke about the shock of the man who had let it off by mistake, all these facts led me to believe that they were terrorists. They had bought an infernal machine on board, and they were going to blow up the ship. I was sure that the white granules which one of them had dropped into the box formed a fuse for blowing it up. They said something about tonight. Was it possible that they were going to carry out their horrible plans on the first evening of our voyage? What shall I do? Shall I go to the captain and tell him about my fears, and put the matter into his hands? The idea was very unpleasant to me. What would be my feelings if it turned out to be a mistake? Anything was better than such a mistake. No, I won't go to the captain. I shall keep an eye on the two men and tell nobody about them. I decided to go down and find them. Suddenly I heard someone shouting in my ear. "Hello, is that you, Hammond?" "Oh," I said as I turned around. "It's Dick Merton. How are you, old man?" This was good luck. Dick was just the man I wanted, strong and clever and full of energy. Ever since I was a small boy in the second form at Harrow, Dick had been my advisor and protector. He saw at once that something was wrong with me. "Hello," he said in a friendly way. "What's the matter with you, Hammond? You look as white as a sheet. Feeling seasick?" No, I said. "Something quite different. Walk up and down with me. Dick, I want to speak to you. Give me your arm." We started walking up and down the deck, but it was some time before I could begin speaking. "Have a cigar," he said, breaking the silence. "No, thank you," I said. "Dick, we shall all be dead men tonight." "Is that why you don't want a cigar?" asked Dick calmly. But he was looking hard at me when he spoke. It seemed to me he thought that I was a little mad. "No," I said. "There is nothing funny here, and I am quite serious. Dick, I've discovered a conspiracy to blow up the ship and everybody on board." And then I told him everything I knew. "There, Dick," I said as I finished. "What do you think of that?" To my surprise, he began laughing. "I would have been frightened if I had heard it from anybody else," he said. "But you, Hammond, have always liked to discover strange things and make up stories about them. Do you remember at school how you told us there was a ghost in the corridor? We soon found out it was your own reflection in the mirror. Why, man," he continued, "why would anyone want to blow up the ship? Why would these two men want to kill the passengers and themselves too? I'm sure that you have mistaken a camera or something like it for an infernal machine." "Nothing of the sort," I said rather coldly. "I know what I'm talking about. As to the box, I have never before seen one like it. They would not have carried it so carefully if it had been only a camera. They were afraid to drop it because there was something dangerous in it. Let's go down to the saloon and have a bottle of wine. You can point out these two men if they are there." "All right," I answered. "I'm not going to lose sight of them all day. Don't stare at them, because I don't want them to think that they are being watched." "All right," said Dick. "I won't." When we came down to the saloon, a good many passengers were there, but I did not see my men. We passed down the room and looked carefully at every berth. They were not there. Then we entered the smoking room. Muller and Flanagan were there. They were both drinking, and a pile of cards lay on the table. They were playing cards as we entered. The conspirators paid no attention to us at all. We sat down and watched them. There was silence in the smoking room for some time. Then Muller turned towards me. "Can you tell me, sir," he said, "when this ship will be heard of again?" They were both looking at me. I tried not to show them how nervous I was. "I think, sir," I answered, "that it will be heard of when it enters Queenstown Harbour." "Ha-ha," laughed the angry little man. "I knew you would say that. Don't push me under the table, Flanagan. I don't like it. I know what I'm doing. You are wrong, sir," he continued, turning to me. "Quite wrong." "The weather is fine," I said. "Why should we not be heard of at Queenstown?" "I didn't say that," the man answered. "I only wanted to say that we should be heard of at some other place first." "Where then?" asked Dick. "That you will never know," said Muller. "But before the day is over, some mysterious event will signal our whereabouts. Ha-ha!" And he laughed again. "Come on deck," said his companion angrily. "You have drunk too much, and now you are talking too much. Come away." Taking him by the arm, he led him out of the smoking room and up to the deck. "Well, what do you think of it?" I cried as I turned towards Dick. He was quite calm as usual. "Think?" he said. "Why, I think that his companion thinks that we have been listening to the silly talk of a half-drunken man. The fellow can't be responsible for his words." "Oh, Dick, Dick," I cried, "how can you be so blind? Don't you see that their every word shows that I am right?" "Nonsense, man," said Dick. "You are too nervous, that's all. And how do you understand all that nonsense about a mysterious event which will signal our whereabouts? I'll tell you what he meant, Dick, I said. He meant that some fishermen near the American shore would see a sudden flash and smoke far out to sea. That's what he meant. I didn't think you were such a fool, Hammond, said Dick, Merton angrily. Let's go on deck. You need some fresh air, I think. When it was time to have dinner, I could hardly eat anything. I was sitting at the table, listening to the talk which was going on around me. I was glad to see that Flanagan was sitting almost in front of me. He drank wine. A few passengers sat between him and his friend Muller. Muller ate little and seemed nervous and restless. Then our captain stood up. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I hope that you'll all make yourselves at home aboard my ship. A bottle of champagne, steward. Here's to our safe arrival in Europe. I hope our friends in America will hear of us in 8 or 9 days." Flanagan and Muller looked at each other with a wicked smile. "May I ask, Captain," I said loudly, "what you think of Fenian manifestos and their terroristic acts?" "Oh, Captain," said an old lady, "do you think that they would really blow up a ship?" "Of course they would if they could," said the captain, "but I am quite sure that they would never blow up mine." "I hope you've given orders to make it impossible for them," said an old man at the end of the table. "All goods sent aboard the ship are carefully examined," said the captain. "But a passenger may bring dynamite aboard with him," I said. "I'm sure they would not want to risk their lives in that way," said the captain. During this conversation, Flanagan didn't show any interest, but he raised now his head and looked at the captain. "Don't you know," he said, "that every secret society has some very brave men? Why can't the Fenians have them too? There are many men who are ready to die for that idea, which seems right in their eyes, though others may think it wrong." "Murder cannot be right in anybody's eyes," said a passenger. "The bombardment of Paris by the Germans was nothing else," said Flanagan, "but the whole world paid very little attention to it. Only the unpleasant word murder has changed into the more pleasant one of war. It seemed right enough to German eyes. Why can't dynamite seem right to the Fenian?" "We had better change the subject of our conversation," said the captain, "or the ladies may have a restless night." I drank off 2 or 3 glasses of wine, and then I went up on deck. Well, I thought, as I looked at the beautiful night around me, if the worst comes to the worst, it is better to die here than to wait for death in agony of a sick bed on land. As I turned my head, I saw 2 figures, now well known to me, at the other side of the deck. They were talking, but I could not hear a word. I decided to hide in one of the lifeboats. It was dark now, so dark that I could hardly see the figures of Flanagan and Muller. A few passengers were still on deck, but many had gone below. Another half-hour passed. It was getting more and more nervous. Then I saw that the 2 men had crossed from the other side, and were standing rather near me now. I saw that Muller had the coat hanging over his arm. All I could do was to lie in the lifeboat and call myself a fool for not telling the captain all about it. Then I heard their whispered talk. "This place will do," said a voice. "Yes, it will." "Are you sure the trigger will act?" "Yes, I'm sure it will." "We were to let it off at 10, were we not?" "Yes, at 10 sharp. We have 8 minutes left." There was a pause. Then the voice began. "I'm afraid they will hear the clicking of the trigger. It doesn't matter. It will be too late for anyone to do anything." How slowly time has passed. "It will make a sensation on land," said a voice. "Yes, it will make a noise in the newspapers." I raised my head and looked over the side of the boat. There was no hope, no help. Death stared me in the face, and I could not do anything. There was nobody on deck except these 2 dark figures. Flanagan was holding a watch in his hand. 3 minutes more," he said. "Put the box down on the deck." It was a little square box. I looked over again. Flanagan was shaking something out of paper into his hand. I saw the white granules, the same I had seen in the morning. I was sure they would be used as a fuse. He dropped them into the little box through the hole. I heard the same strange noise which I had heard before. "A minute and a half more," he said. "Shall I pull the string, or will you do it?" "I shall pull it," said Muller. I could stand it no longer. "Stop!" I screamed, jumping up to my feet. "Stop it at once." I was brave enough now. "Why do you want to have the blood of 200 people upon your hands?" "He's mad," said Flanagan. "Time's up. Pull the string, Muller." I jumped onto the deck. "You shan't do it," I cried. "What right do you have to stop us? It's no business of yours. Get away from this." "Never," I said. "We can't lose a moment now. Time is up. I'll hold him, Muller, while you pull the trigger." Next moment I was struggling with Flanagan. It was useless. I was a child in his hands. He pushed me against the side of the ship and held me there. "Now," he said, "he's helpless. He can't do anything. Hurry up, Muller." I felt that it was time to prepare myself for death. I saw Muller come up to the box and pull the string. There came a strange clicking noise from the box. The trigger fell. The side of the box dropped and let off 2 grey carrier pigeons. Little more can be said. Perhaps the best thing I can do is to keep silent and let the sporting correspondent of the New York Herald explain everything. Here is what he wrote in his article soon after our ship had left America. An interesting match of pigeon flying took place last week between the pigeons of John H. Flanagan of Boston and Jeremiah Muller of Lowell. The start was from the deck of the transatlantic steamship Spartan at 10 o'clock on the evening of starting from New York. The distance between the ship and the land was about 100 miles. The match and preparations for it were kept secret, as some captains do not allow sporting matches to take place aboard their ships. There was some little difficulty at the last moment, but the match began almost on time. Muller's pigeon won as it arrived in Lowell on the following morning. What happened to Flanagan's bird, we do not know. We hope that a few such matches will make pigeon flying more popular in America.
B-24 by Arthur Conan Doyle, read by Brian Cox.
I told my story when I was taken, and no one would listen to me. Then I told it again at the trial, the whole thing, absolutely as it happened, without so much as a word added. I said it all out truly, so help me God. All that Lady Manoring had said and done, all that I had said and done, just as it occurred. And what did I get for it? The prisoner put forward a rambling and inconsequential statement, incredible in its details and unsupported by any shred of corroborative evidence. That was what one of the London papers said, and others let it pass as if I had made no defence at all. And yet, with my own eyes, I saw Lord Manoring murdered, and I'm as guiltless of it as any man on the jury that tried me. Now, sir, you're there to receive the petitions of prisoners. It all lies with you. All that I ask is that you read it. Just read it. And then that you make an inquiry or two about the private character of this Lady Manoring, if she still keeps the name that she had 3 years ago when, to my sorrow and ruin, I came to meet her. You could use a private inquiry agent or a good lawyer, and you would soon learn enough to show you that my story is the true one. Think of the glory it would be to you to have all the papers saying that there would have been a shocking miscarriage of justice if it had not been for your perseverance and intelligence. That must be your reward, since I am a poor man and can offer you nothing. But if you don't do it, may you never lie easy in your bed again. May no night pass that you are not haunted by the thought of the man who rots in jail because you have not done the duty which you are paid to do. But you will do it, sir. I know. Just make 1 or 2 inquiries, and you will soon find which way the wind blows. Remember, also, that the only person who profited by the crime was herself, since it changed her from an unhappy wife to a rich young widow. There's the end of the string in your hand, and you only have to follow it up and see where it leads to. Mind you, sir, I make no complaint as far as the burglary goes. I don't whine about what I've deserved, and so far I've had no more than I have deserved. Burglary it was, right enough, and my 3 years have gone to pay for it. It was shown at the trial that I had a hand in the Merton Cross business, and did a year for that, so my story had the less attention on that account. A man with a previous conviction never gets a really fair trial. I own to the burglary, but when it comes to the murder which brought me a lifer, any judge but Sir James might have given me the gallows, then I tell you I had nothing to do with it, and that I am an innocent man. And now, I'll take that night, the 13th of September, 1894. And I'll give you just exactly what occurred, and may God's hand strike me down if I go 1 inch over the truth. I've been at Bristol in the summer, looking for work, and then I had a notion that I might get something at Portsmouth, for I was trained as a skilled mechanic, so I came tramping my way across the south of England and doing odd jobs as I went. I was trying all I knew to keep off the cross, for I'd done a year in Exeter jail, and I had enough of visiting Queen Victoria. But it's cruel hard to get work when once the black mark is against your name, and it was all I could do to keep body and soul together. At last, after 10 days of wood-cutting and stone-breaking on starvation pay, I found myself near Salisbury, with a couple of shillings in my pocket, and my boots and my patience clean wore out. There's an alehouse called the Willing Mind, which stands on the road between Blandford and Salisbury, and it was there that night I engaged a bed. I was sitting alone in the tap-room just about closing time when the innkeeper, Allen his name was, came beside me and began yarning about the neighbours. He was a man that liked to talk, and to have someone to listen to his talk, so I sat there smoking and drinking a mug of ale, which he had stood me, and I took no great interest in what he said until he began to talk, as the devil would have it, about the riches of Manoring Hall. "Meaning the large house on the right before I came into the village," said I. "The one that stands in its own park?" "Exactly," said he. "And I'm giving all our talk so that you may know that I'm telling you the truth and hiding nothing." "The long white house with the pillars," said he, "at the side of the Blandford Road." Now, I looked at it as I passed, and it had crossed my mind, as such thoughts will, that it was a very easy house to get into, with a great row of grand windows and glass doors. I had put the thought away from me, and now here was this landlord bringing it back with his talk about the riches within. I said nothing, but I listened, and as luck would have it, he would always come back to this one subject. "He was a miser young, so you can think what he is now in his age," said he. "Well, he's had some good out of his money." "What good could he have out of it if he doesn't spend it?" said I. "Well, it bought him the prettiest wife in England, and that was some good that he got out of it. She thought she would have the spending of it, but she knows the difference now." "Who was she then?" I asked, just for the sake of something to say. "She was nobody at all until the old lord made her his lady," said he. "She came up from London way, and some said that she had been on the stage there, but nobody knew. The old lord was away for a year, and when he came home he brought a young wife back with him, and there she has been ever since. Stevens, the butler, did tell me once that she was the light of the house when first she came. But what with her husband's mean and aggravating way, and what with her loneliness, for he hates to see a visitor within his doors, and what with his bitter words, for he has a tongue like a hornet's sting, her life all went out of her, and she became a white, silent creature, moping about the country lanes. Some say that she loved another man, and that it was just the riches of the old lord which tempted her to be false to her lover, and that now she is eating her heart out because she has lost the one without being any nearer to the other. For she might be the poorest woman in the parish for all the money that she's had the handling of. Well, sir, you can imagine that it didn't interest me very much to hear about the quarrels between a lord and lady. What did it matter to me if she hated the sound of his voice, or if he put every indignity upon her in the hope of breaking her spirit, and spoke to her as he would never have dared to speak to one of his servants? The landlord told me of these things, and of many more like them, but they passed out of my mind, for they were no concern of mine. But what I did want to hear was the form in which Lord Manoring kept his riches. Title deeds and stock certificates are but paper, and more danger than profit to the man who takes them, but metal and stones are worth a risk. And then, as if he were answering to my very thoughts, the landlord told me of Lord Manoring's great collection of gold medals, that it was the most valuable in the world, and that it was reckoned that if they were put into a sack, the strongest man in the parish would not be able to raise them. Then his wife called him, and he and I went to our beds. I'm not arguing to make out a case for myself, but I beg you, sir, to bear all the facts in your mind, and to ask yourself whether a man could be more sorely tempted than I was. I make bold to say that there are few who could have held out against it. There I lay on my bed that night, a desperate man, without hope or work, and with my last shilling in my pocket. I had tried to be honest, and honest folk had turned their backs upon me. They taunted me for theft, and yet they pushed me towards it. I was caught in the stream, and I could not get out. And then it was such a chance. The great house, all lined with windows, the golden medals which could so easily be melted down. It was like putting a loaf before a starving man and expecting him not to eat it. I fought against it for a time, but it was no use. And at last I sat up on the side of my bed, and I swore that night I should either be a rich man and able to give up crime forever, or that the irons should be on my wrists once more. Then I slipped on my clothes, and having put a shilling on the table, for the landlord had treated me well, and I did not wish to cheat him, I passed out through the window into the garden of the inn. There was a high wall round this garden, and I had a job to get over it, but once on the other side it was all plain sailing. I did not meet a soul upon the road, and the iron gate of the avenue was open. No one was moving at the lodge. The moon was shining, and I could see the great house glimmering white through the archway of trees. I walked up to it for a quarter of a mile or so, until I was at the edge of the drive, where it ended in a broad, gravelled space before the main door. There I stood in the shadow, and looked at the long building, with a full moon shining in every window and silvering the high stone front. I crouched there for some time, and I wondered where I should find the easiest entrance. The corner window of the side seemed to be the one which was least overlooked, and a screen of ivy hung heavily over it. My best chance was evidently there. I worked my way under the trees to the back of the house, and then crept along the black shadow of the building. A dog barked and rattled his chain, but I stood waiting until he was quiet. Then I stole on once more until I came to the window which I had chosen. It is astonishing how careless they are in the country, in places far removed from large towns where the thought of burglars never enter their heads. I call it setting temptation in a poor man's way, when he puts his hand, meaning no harm, upon a door and finds it swing open before him. In this case it was not so bad as that, but the window was merely fastened with an ordinary catch, which I opened with a push from the blade of my knife. I pulled open the window as quickly as possible, then I thrust the knife through the slit in the shutter and prized it open. They were folding shutters, and I shoved them before me and walked into the room. "Good evening, sir." "You are very welcome," said a voice. "I've had some starts in my life, but never one to come up to that one." There, in the opening of the shutters, within reach of my arm, was standing a woman, with a small coil of wax taper burning in her hand. She was tall and straight and slender, with a beautiful white face that might have been cut out of clear marble, but her hair and eyes were as black as night. She was dressed in some sort of white dressing gown which flowed down to her feet, and what with this robe and what with her face, it seemed as if a spirit from above was standing in front of me. My knees knocked together. I held on to the shutter with one hand to give me support. I should have turned and run away if I had the strength, but I could only just stand and stare at her. She soon brought me back to myself once more. "Don't be frightened," said she, and they were strange words for the mistress of a house to have to use to a burglar. "I saw you out of my bedroom window when you were hiding under those trees, so I slipped downstairs, and then I heard you at the window. I should have opened it for you if you had waited, but you managed it yourself, just as I came up." I still held in my hand the long clasp knife with which I had opened the shutter. I was unshaven and grimed from a week on the roads. Altogether, there are few people who would have cared to face me alone at 1 in the morning. But this woman, if I had been her lover, meeting her by appointment, could not have looked upon me with a more welcoming eye. She laid a hand upon my sleeve and drew me into the room. "What's the meaning of this, ma'am?" "Don't get trying any little games upon me," said I, in my roughest way, and I can put on rough when I like. "It'll be the worse for you if you play me any trick," I added, showing her my knife. "I will play you no trick," said she. "On the contrary, I'm your friend, and I wish to help you." "Excuse me, ma'am, but I find it hard to believe that," said I. "Why should you wish to help me?" "I have my own reasons," said she. And then suddenly, with those black eyes blazing out of her white face, "It's because I hate him. Hate him. Hate him. Now you understand." I remember what the landlord had told me, and I did understand. I looked at her ladyship's face, and I knew that I could trust her. She wanted to revenge herself upon her husband. She wanted to hit him where it would hurt him most, upon the pocket. She hated him so that she would even lower her pride to take such a man as me into her confidence, if she could gain her end by doing so. I've hated some folk in my time, but I don't think I ever understood what hate was until I saw that woman's face in the light of the taper. "You'll trust me now," said she, with another coaxing touch upon my sleeve. "Yes, your ladyship. You know me, then? I can guess who you are. I dare say my wrongs are the talk of the county. But what does he care for that? He only cares for one thing in the whole world, and that you can take from him this night. Have you a bag? No, your ladyship. Shut the shutter behind you. Then no one can see the light. You're quite safe. The servants are all asleep in the other wing. I can show you where all the most valuable things are. You cannot carry them all, so we must pick the best." The room in which I found myself was long and low, with many rugs and skins scattered about on a polished wood floor. Small cases stood here and there, and the walls were decorated with spears and swords and paddles and other things which find their way into museums. There were some queer clothes, too, which had been brought from savage countries, and the lady took down a large leather sack-bag from among them. "This sleeping sack will do," said she. "Now come with me, and I will show you where the medals are." It was like a dream to me, to think that this tall white woman was the lady of the house, and she was lending me a hand to rob her own home. I could have burst out laughing at the thought of it, and yet there was something in that pale face of hers which stopped my laughter and turned me cold and serious. She swept on in front of me like a spirit, with the green taper in her hand, and I walked behind with my sack until we came to a door at the end of this museum. It was locked, but the key was in it, and she led me through. The room beyond was a small one, hung all around with curtains which had pictures on them. It was the hunting of a deer that was painted on it, as I remember, and in the flicker of that light you would have sworn that the dogs and the horses were streaming around the walls. The only other thing in the room was a row of cases made of walnut with brass ornaments. They had glass tops, and beneath this glass I saw the long lines of those gold medals, some of them as big as a plate and half an inch thick, all resting upon red velvet and glowing and gleaming in the darkness. My fingers were just itching to be at them. I slipped my knife under the lock of one of the cases to wrench it open. "Wait a moment," said she, laying a hand upon my arm. "You might do better than this." "I'm very well satisfied, ma'am," I said. "I'm much obliged to your ladyship for kind assistance." "You can do better," she repeated. "Would not golden sovereigns be worth more to you than these things?" "Well, yes," said I. "That's best of all." "Well," said she, "he sleeps just above our head. It is but one short staircase. There is a tin box with money enough to fill this bag under his bed. How can I get it without waking him?" "What matter if he does wake?" She looked very hard at me as she spoke. "You could keep him from calling out." No, ma'am. I'll have none of that." "Just as you like," said she. "I thought you were a stout-hearted sort of man by your appearance, but I see that I had made a mistake. If you are afraid to run the risk of one old man, then of course you cannot have the gold which is under his bed. You are the best judge of your own business, but I should think that you would do better at some other trade." I'll not have murder on my conscience. You could overpower him without harming him. I never said anything about murder. The money lies under the bed. But if you are faint-hearted, it is better that you should not attempt it. She worked upon me so, partly with her scorn, partly with this money that she held before my eyes, that I believe I should have yielded and taken my chances upstairs, had it not been that I saw her eyes following the struggle within me in such a crafty, malignant fashion, that it was evident she was bent upon making me the tool of her revenge, and that she would leave me no choice but to do the old man an injury or to be captured by him. She felt suddenly that she was giving herself away, and she changed her face to a kindly, friendly smile. But it was too late, for I had had my warning. "I will not go upstairs," said I. "I have all I want here." She looked her contempt at me, and there never was a face which could look it plainer. "Very good. You can take these medals. I should be glad if you would begin at this end. I suppose they will all be the same value when melted down, but these are the ones which are the rarest and therefore the most precious to him. It is not necessary to break the locks. If you press that brass knob, you will find that there is a secret spring. So, take that small one first. It is the very apple of his eye." She had opened one of the cases, and the beautiful things all lay exposed before me. I had my hand upon the one which she had pointed out, when suddenly a change came over her face, and she held up one finger as a warning. "Hist!" she whispered. "What was that?" Far away, in the silence of the house, we heard a low, dragging, shuffling sound, and a distant tread of feet. She closed and fastened the case in an instant. "It's my husband," she whispered. "All right. Don't be alarmed. I'll arrange it. Here, quick, behind the tapestry." She pushed me behind the painted curtains upon the wall, my empty leather bag still in my hand. Then she took her taper and walked quickly into the room from which we had come. From where I stood, I could see her through the open door. "Is that you, Robert?" she cried. The light of a candle shone through the door of the museum, and the shuffling steps came nearer and nearer. And then I saw a face in the doorway, a great, heavy face, all lines and creases, with a huge curving nose and a pair of gold glasses fixed across it. He had to throw his head back to see through the glasses, and that great nose thrust out in front of him like the beak of some sort of fowl. He was a big man, very tall and burly, so that in his loose dressing gown his figure seemed to fill the whole doorway. He had a pile of grey curling hair all round his head, but his face was clean-shaven. His mouth was thin and small and prim, hidden away under his long, masterful nose. He stood there, holding the candle in front of him and looking at his wife with a queer, malicious gleam in his eyes. It only needed that one look to tell me that he was as fond of her as she was of him. "How's this?" he asked. "Some new tantrum? What do you mean by wandering about the house? Why don't you go to bed?" "I could not sleep," she answered. She spoke languidly and wearily. If she was an actress once, she had not forgotten her calling. "Might I suggest," said he, in the same mocking kind of voice, "that a good conscience is an excellent aid to sleep?" "That cannot be true," she answered, "for you sleep very well." "I have only one thing in my life to be ashamed of," said he, and his hair bristled up with anger until he looked like an old cockatoo. "You know best what it is. It is a mistake which has brought its own punishment with it. To me as well as to you, remember that. You have very little to whine about. It was I who stooped and you who rose." "Rose? Yes, rose. I suppose you do not deny that it is a promotion to exchange the music hall for Manoring Hall? Fool that I was ever to take you out of your true sphere. If you think so, why do you not separate? Because private misery is better than public humiliation. Because it is easier to suffer for a mistake than to own to it. because also I like to keep you in my sight, and to know that you cannot go back to him. You villain! You cowardly villain! Yes, yes, my lady. I know your secret ambition, but it shall never be while I live, and if it happens to be after my death, I will at least take care that you go to him as a beggar. You and dear Edward will never have the satisfaction of squandering my savings, and you may make up your mind to that, my lady. Why are those shutters and the window open? I found the night very close. It is not safe. How do you know that some tramp may not be outside? Are you aware that my collection of medals is worth more than any similar collection in the world? You have left the door open also. What is there to prevent anyone from rifling the cases? I was here. I know you were here. I heard you moving about in the medal room, and that was why I came down. What were you doing? Looking at the medals. What else should I be doing? This curiosity is something new. He looked suspiciously at her, and moved on towards the inner room, she walking beside him. It was at this moment that I saw something which startled. I had laid my clasp knife open upon the top of one of the cases, and there it lay in full view. She saw it before he did, and with a woman's cunning she held her taper out so that the light of it came between Lord Manoring's eyes and the knife. Then she took it with her left hand and held it against her gown, out of his sight. He looked about from case to case. I could have put my hand out at one time upon his long nose, but there was nothing to show that the medals had been tampered with, and so, still snarling and grumbling, he shuffled off into the other room once more. And now I have to speak of what I heard rather than what I saw. But I swear to you, as I shall stand some day before my Maker, that what I say is the truth. When they passed into the outer room, I saw him lay his candle upon the corner of one of the tables, and he sat himself down, but in such a position that he was just out of my sight. She moved behind him, as I could tell from the fact that the light of her taper threw his long lumpy shadow upon the floor in front of him. Then he began talking about this man whom he called Edward, and every word that he spoke was like a blistering drop of vitriol. He spoke low, so that I could not hear it all, but from what I heard, I should have guessed that she would as soon have been lashed with a whip. At first she said some hot words in reply, but then she was silent, and he went on and on in that cold, mocking voice of his, nagging and insulting and tormenting, until I wondered that she could bear to stand there in silence and listen to it. Then suddenly I heard him say in a sharp voice, "Come from behind me. Leave go of my collar. What? Would you dare to strike me?" Then there was a sound like a blow, just a soft sort of thud, and then I heard him cry out, "My God, it's blood!" He shuffled with his feet as if he was getting up, and then I heard another blow, and he cried out, "Oh, you she-devil!" and was quiet, except for a dripping and a splashing upon the floor. I ran out from behind my curtain and rushed into the other room, shaking all over with the horror of it. The old man had slipped down in the chair, and his dressing gown had rucked up until he looked as if he had a monstrous hump to his back. His head, with the gold glasses still fixed on his nose, was lolling over to one side, and his little mouth was open, just like a dead fish. I could not see where the blood was coming from, but I could still hear it drumming upon the floor. She stood behind him, with the candle shining full upon her face. Her lips were pressed together, and her eyes shining, and a touch of colour had come into each of her cheeks. It just wanted that to make her the most beautiful woman I had ever seen in my life. "You've done it now," said I. "Yes," said she, in a quiet way. "I've done it now." "What are you going to do?" I asked. "They'll have you for murder as sure as fate." "Never fear about me. I've nothing to live for. And it does not matter. Give me a hand to set him straight in the chair. It's horrible to see him like this." I did so, though it turned me cold all over to touch him. Some of his blood came on my hand and sickened me. "Now," said she, "you may as well have the medals as anyone else. Take them and go." "I don't want them. I only want to get away. I was never mixed up with a business like this before." "Nonsense," said she. "You came here for medals, and here they are at your mercy. Why should you not have them? There's no one to prevent you." I held the bag still in my hand. She opened the case, and between us we threw 100 or so of the medals into it. They were all from the one case, but I could not bring myself to wait for any more. Then I made for the window, for the very air of this house seemed to poison me after what I had seen and heard. As I looked back, I saw her standing there, tall and graceful, with the light in her hand, just as I had seen her at first. She waved goodbye, and I waved back at her and sprang out into the gravel drive. I thank God that I can lay my hand upon my heart and say that I have never done a murder. But perhaps it would be different if I had been able to read that woman's mind and thoughts. There might have been 2 bodies in the room instead of 1, if I could have seen behind that last smile of hers. But I thought of nothing but getting safely away, and it never entered my head how she might be fixing the rope round my neck. I had not taken 5 steps out from the window, skirting down the shadow of the house, in the way that I had come, when I heard a scream that might have raised the parish, and then another. "Murder!" she cried. "Murder! Murder! Help!" And her voice rang out in the quiet of the night time and sounded all over the countryside. It went through my head, that dreadful cry. In an instant, lights began to move and windows to fly up, not only in the house behind me, but at the lodge and in the stables in front. Like a frightened rabbit, I bolted down the drive, but I heard the clang of the gate being shut before I could reach it. Then I hid my bag of medals under some dry faggots, and I tried to get away across the park. But someone saw me in the moonlight, and presently I had 6 of them on me, with dogs upon my heels. I crouched down among the brambles, but those dogs were too many for me, and I was glad enough when the men came up and prevented me from being torn into pieces. They seized me and dragged me back to the room from which I had come. "Is this the man, your ladyship?" asked the oldest of them. The same whom I found out afterwards to be the butler. She had been bending over the body, with a handkerchief to her eyes, and now she turned upon me with the face of a fury. Oh, what an actress that woman was! "Yes, yes, it is the very man," she cried. "Oh, you villain, you cruel villain, to treat an old man so!" There was a man there who seemed to be a village constable. He laid his hand upon my shoulder. "What do you say to that?" said he. "It was she who did it," I cried, pointing at the woman, whose eyes never flinched before mine. "Come, come, try another," said the constable, and one of the men servants struck at me with his fist. "I tell you that I saw her do it. She stabbed him twice with a knife. She first helped me to rob him, and then she murdered him. The footman tried to strike me again, but she held up her hand. "Do not hurt him," said she. "I think that his punishment may safely be left to the law." "I'll see to that, your ladyship," said the constable. "Your ladyship actually saw the crime committed, did you not?" "Yes, yes. I saw it with my own eyes. It was horrible. We heard the noise and we came down. My poor husband was in front. The man had one of the cases open, and was filling a black leather bag which he held in his hand. He rushed past us, and my husband seized him. There was a struggle, and he stabbed him twice. There, you can see the blood upon his hands. If I am not mistaken, his knife is still in Lord Manoring's body." "Look at the blood upon her hands," I cried. "She has been holding up his lordship's head, you lying rascal," said the butler. "And here's the very sack her ladyship spoke of," said the constable, as a groom came in with the one which I had dropped in my flight. "And here are the medals inside. That's good enough for me. We will keep 'em safe here tonight, and tomorrow the inspector and I can take 'em to Salisbury." "Poor creature," said the woman. "For my own part, I forgive him any injury which he has done me. Who knows what temptation may have driven him to crime? His conscience and the law will give him punishment enough, without any reproach of mine rendering it more bitter. I could not answer. I tell you, sir, I could not answer. So taken aback was I by the assurance of the woman. And so, seeming by my silence to agree to all that she had said, I was dragged away by the butler and the constable into the cellar, in which they locked me for the night. There, sir, I've told you the whole story of the events which led up to the murder of Lord Manoring by his wife upon the night of September the 14th in the year 1894. Perhaps you will put my statement on one side, as the constable did at Manoring Towers, or the judge afterwards at the county assizes. Or perhaps you will see that there is the ring of truth in what I say, and you will follow it up, and so make your name forever as a man who does not grudge personal trouble where justice is to be done. I have only you to look to, sir, and if you will clear my name of this false accusation, then I will worship you, as one man never yet worshipped another. But if you fail me, then I give you my solemn promise that I will rope myself up this day month to the bar of my window, and from that time on I will come to plague you in your dreams, if ever yet one man was able to come back and to haunt another. What I ask you to do is very simple. Make inquiries about this woman. Watch her. Learn her past history. Find out what use she is making of the money which has come to her, and whether there is not a man, Edward, as I have stated. If from all this you learn anything which shows you her real character, or which seems to you to corroborate the story which I have told you, then I am sure that I can rely upon your goodness of heart to come to the rescue of an innocent man.
End of Disc 5.
The Adventure of the Three Students. In 1895, Mr. Sherlock Holmes and I spent some weeks in one of our great university towns. It was during this time that the facts which I'm going to tell you about took place. One evening, we received a visit from a certain Mr. Hilton Soames, a lecturer at the College of St. Luke's. Mr. Soames was so excited that it was clear that something very unusual had happened. "I hope, Mr. Holmes," he said, "that you can give me a few hours of your time. A very unpleasant thing has taken place at our college, and I don't know what to do." "I'm very busy just now," my friend answered. "Could you call the police?" No, my dear sir, that is absolutely impossible. It is just one of these cases when it is quite necessary to avoid scandal. I am sure you will keep our secret. You are the only man in the world who can help me. I beg you, Mr. Holmes, to do what you can." Holmes agreed, though very unwillingly, and our visitor began his story. "I must explain to you, Mr. Holmes," he said, "that tomorrow is the first day of the examination for the Fortescue Scholarship. I am one of the examiners. My subject is Greek. The first of the examination papers consists of a piece of Greek translation, which the candidates for the scholarship have not seen before. Of course, every candidate would be happy if he could see it before the examination and prepare in advance. So much care is taken to keep it secret. Today, at about 3 o'clock, I was reading the proofs of the examination papers. At 4:30, I went out to take tea in a friend's room, and I left the papers upon my desk. I was absent a little more than an hour. When I approached my door, I was surprised to see a key in it. For a moment, I thought I'd left my own key there, but when I put my hand in my pocket, I found the key in it. The other key to my room belonged to my servant, Bannister, who has been looking after my room for 10 years. I'm absolutely sure of his honesty. I understood that he had entered my room to ask if I wanted tea. When he saw I was not there, he went out and very carelessly left the key in the door. The moment I looked at my table, I knew that someone had touched the examination papers. There were 3 pages to it. I had left them altogether. Now I found that one of them was lying on the floor, one was on a small table near the window, and the third was where I'd left it on my desk. Holmes spoke for the first time. The first page on the floor, the second near the window, and the third where you left it, he repeated. Exactly, Mr. Holmes. But how could you know that? Please, continue your very interesting story. I did not know what to think. Bannister said he had not touched the papers, and I'm sure he speaks the truth. Then I thought that some student passing by my door had noticed the key in it. Knowing that I was out, he'd entered to look at the papers. The Fortescue scholarship is a large sum of money, so the student was ready to run a risk in order to get it. Bannister was very much upset by the incident. He nearly fainted when I told him that someone had touched the examination papers. I gave him a little brandy and left him in his chair while I made the most careful examination of the room. I soon saw other traces of the man who had been in my room. Evidently, the man had copied the paper in a great hurry. My writing table is quite new, and I found a cut on it about 3 inches long. Not only this, but on the table I found a small black ball of something like clay or earth and some sawdust. I'm sure that these marks were left by the man who touched the examination papers, but there were no traces of his footsteps. I didn't know what to do next, when suddenly the happy thought came into my head that you were in town, so I came straight to you to put the matter into your hands. Do help me, Mr. Holmes. You see, my dilemma, either I find the man, or the examination must be put off until new papers are prepared. But this cannot be done without explanations, and a terrible scandal will follow. This will throw a cloud, not only on the college, but on the university. I shall be happy to look into the matter, and give as much help as I can, said Holmes, rising and putting on his overcoat. The case is not without interest. Did anyone visit you in your room after the papers had come to you? Yes, said Mr. Soames. Young Doyle, an Indian student who lives on the same floor, came over to ask me a question about some of the details of the examination. The examination which he is going to take? Yes. And the papers were on your table? Yes. But as far as I remember, they were rolled up. Did anyone else come to your room? No. Did anyone know that the papers would be there? No one. Did this man Bannister know? No, certainly not. No one knew. Where is Bannister now? He was very ill, poor man. I left him in my room. I was in a hurry to come to you. So you left the door open? Yes, but I locked up the papers first. Well, it seems, Mr. Soames, that the man who touched your papers came upon them without knowing they were there. So it seems to me, said Mr. Soames. Let's go to your room now, Mr. Soames. I am at your service. All right, Watson? Come with us if you want to. It was already getting dark when we entered the courtyard of the old college. The window of our client's sitting room opened onto it. Holmes approached the window. Then he stood on tiptoe in order to look inside. He must have entered through the door, said Mr. Soames. The window doesn't open. Well, said Holmes, laughing, if there's nothing to be learned here, we'd better go inside. The lecturer unlocked his door, and we went in. Your servant seems to have felt better, said Holmes. He's not here. You left him by the chair, you say? Which chair? By the window over there. I see. near this little table. Of course, what has happened is quite clear. The man entered and took the papers page by page from your writing table. He carried them over to the window table because there he could see if you came across the courtyard. He couldn't see me, said Soames, for I entered by the side door. Ah, that's good, said Holmes. Well, he carried the first page over to the window and copied it. Then he threw it down and took the next one. He was copying it when your return made him go away in a hurry. He had no time to put the papers back. Did you hear any hurrying steps on the stairs as you came up to the door? No, I didn't. Well, Sherlock Holmes went on, I don't think we can learn anything more from this table. Let's examine the writing table. The man left no traces on it except some clay and sawdust. Dear me, this is very interesting. And the cut? I see. Where does that door lead to? Holmes asked suddenly. To my bedroom, answered Soames. I should like to have a look at it, said Holmes. He entered the bedroom and examined it carefully. No, I see nothing, he said. What about this curtain? Oh, you hang your clothes behind it. If anyone has to conceal himself in the room, he must do it there. The bed is too low. No one there, I suppose. And he drew the curtain. It seemed to me that he was prepared to find somebody behind the curtain and to act quickly. No one, said Holmes. But what's this? And he picked up from the floor a small ball of black clay, exactly like the one upon the table. Your visitor seems to have left traces in your bedroom as well as your sitting room, he said. Do you mean to tell me that he was in my bedroom? What for? Asked Mr. Soames. I think it's clear enough, answered Holmes. You came back by the side door, while he was sure that you would come across the courtyard. So he did not see you coming back, and he was copying the paper until he heard your steps at the very door. What could he do? He caught up everything he had with him, and he rushed into your bedroom to hide himself. Good God! Mr. Holmes, do you mean to tell me that all the time I was talking to Bannister, we had the criminal in my bedroom? So I understand it. Perhaps he got out by the window, began Mr. Soames, but Holmes shook his head impatiently. I think you have told me, he said, that there are 3 students who use the stairs and pass your door. Yes, there are. And they are all going to take the examination? Yes. Who are they? Asked Holmes. The first floor, began Soames, is occupied by a fine student and athlete. He plays cricket for the college and is a prize winner for the long jump. He is a fine young fellow. His father was very rich, but lost all his money in horse racing. He died, and young Gilchrist was left very poor. But he is hard-working and will do well. The second floor, continued Mr. Soames, is occupied by Doyle Russ, the Indian. He's a very quiet fellow, very hard-working too, though his Greek is his weak subject. The top floor belongs to Miles McLaren. He is a brilliant fellow when he wants to work, one of the brightest intellects of the university, but his conduct is very bad. He was nearly expelled because of a card scandal in his first year. He's very lazy, and I'm sure very much afraid of the examination. Perhaps of the 3 he is the only one who might possibly be suspected. Exactly, said Holmes. Now, Mr. Soames, let us have a look at your servant Bannister. Bannister was a little white-faced, clean-shaven, grey-haired fellow of 50. His hands were shaking. He was so nervous. I understand, began Mr. Holmes, that you left your key in the door. Yes, sir. Was it not rather strange that you should do this on the very day when there were these papers inside? It was most unfortunate, sir, but I've done the same thing at other times. When did you enter the room? It was about 4:30. That is Mr. Soames's tea time. How long did you stay? When I saw that he was out, I left at once. Did you look at the papers on the table? No, sir, certainly not. How did it happen that you left the key in the door? I had the tea tray in my hand. I thought I would come back for the key, then I forgot. Then the door was open all the time. Yes, sir. When Mr. Soames returned and sent for you, you were very much upset. Yes, sir, I nearly fainted, sir. Where were you when you began to feel bad? Where was I, sir? Why, here, near the door. That's strange, because you sat down in that chair near the window. Why did you pass these other chairs? I don't know, sir. I did not matter to me where I sat. I really don't think he knew much about it, Mr. Holmes. He looked very bad, said Mr. Soames. You stayed here when your master left, went on Holmes. Only for a minute or so. Then I locked the door and went to my room. Whom do you suspect? Oh, I don't know, sir. Thank you. That will do, said Holmes. And now, Mr. Soames, I should like to have a look at the 3 students. Is it possible? No difficulty at all, answered Soames. Visitors often go over to the college. Come along. I shall be your guide. No names, please, said Holmes, as we knocked at Gilchrist's door. A tall young fellow opened the door and very politely invited us into the room. The student left a very pleasant impression. The Indian, a silent little fellow, seemed to be very glad when we said goodbye to him. We did not get into the 3rd room. In answer to our knock, nothing but bad language came from behind the door. I don't care who you are. You can go to the devil, roared the angry voice. Tomorrow is the exam, and I won't open my door to anyone. A rude fellow, said our guide, turning red with anger. Of course he did not know who was knocking, but anyhow his conduct is rather suspicious. Holmes's reply was indeed strange. Can you tell me his exact height? He asked. Really, Mr. Holmes, answered Soames in surprise, I can't. He's taller than the Indian, not so tall as Gilchrist. That's very important, said Holmes. And now, Mr. Soames, I wish you good night. Good God, Mr. Holmes, are you going to leave me in this terrible situation? Cried Mr. Soames. Tomorrow is the examination. I must take some definite action tonight. You must leave things as they are. I shall come early tomorrow morning, and we shall talk the matter over. I hope that I shall be able to help you. Meanwhile, you change nothing. Nothing at all. Goodbye. Very good, Mr. Holmes. Goodbye. Well, Watson, what do you think of it? Holmes asked, as we came into the street. There are 3 men. It must be one of them. What's your opinion? The rude fellow on the top floor made the worst impression, but that Indian looked at us in a queer way, I remarked. So would you, if a group of strangers came in on you when you were preparing for an examination next morning? No, I see nothing in it, but that fellow Bannister does puzzle me. He impressed me as a perfectly honest man, I said. So he did me. That's all very puzzling. Why should a perfectly honest man... Holmes stopped and did not say a word more about the case the whole evening. At 8 in the morning, Holmes came into my room. Well, Watson, said he, It's time we went down to the college. Soames will be in a terrible state until we tell him something positive. Have you got anything positive to tell him? Well, my dear Watson, I have solved the mystery. Have you got fresh evidence? Aha! It's not for nothing that I got up at 6 and covered at least 5 miles in 2 hours. Look at that. He held out his hand, and I saw 3 little balls of black clay. Why, Holmes, you had only 2 yesterday, and 1 more this morning. Don't you think, Watson, that the source of number 3 is also the source of numbers 1 and 2? Eh, Watson? Well, come along and let us help Mr. Soames out of his trouble. We found Mr. Soames in a very nervous state. He ran towards Holmes. Thank heaven you've come. I feared that you should have given up on this case in despair. What am I to do? Shall we begin the examination? Yes, of course. Let it begin. But this rascal! He will not take the examination. You know him? I think so. Kindly ring the bell. Bannister entered and stepped back in surprise and fear when he saw Holmes again. "Will you please tell me, Bannister," began Holmes, "the truth about yesterday's incident?" The man turned white to the roots of his hair. "I've told you everything, sir," he said. "Nothing to add?" "Nothing at all, sir." "Well, then I shall help you. When you sat down on that chair at the window, did you do so in order to conceal some object? An object which could have shown Mr. Soames who had been in the room?" Bannister's face was deathly pale. "No, sir, certainly not." "Oh, it's only a suggestion," said Holmes very politely. "I can't prove it, but it seems probable enough that when Mr. Soames left the room, you let out the man who had been hiding in the bedroom." Bannister licked his dry lips. "There was no man, sir." Come, Bannister." "No, sir, there was no one." "All right, then, that will do. But please remain in the room, Bannister. Now, Soames, may I ask to go up to the room of young Gilchrist and ask him to step down into yours?" A moment later, Soames returned, bringing with him the student. He was tall and very handsome, with a pleasant open face. His troubled blue eyes glanced at each of us and finally rested on Bannister. "Now, Mr. Gilchrist, we are all quite alone here. No one will ever know a word of what passes between us. We want to know, Mr. Gilchrist, how you, an honest man, could do such a thing as you did yesterday." The young man looked at Bannister with horror and reproach. No, Mr. Gilchrist," cried the servant. "I never said a word." "But you have now," cried Holmes. "Now, Mr. Gilchrist, you must see that your position is hopeless. Your only chance is a frank confession." For a moment Gilchrist tried to say something, but suddenly he burst into a storm of sobbing. Come, said Holmes kindly. "We know that you are not the criminal. Don't trouble to answer. I shall tell Mr. Soames what happened, and you listen and correct me where I am wrong." "From the moment you told me your story, Mr. Soames, it was clear to me that the man who entered your room knew that the papers were there. How did he know? You remember, of course, that I examined your window. I was thinking of how tall a man must be in order to see, as he passed, what papers were on the writing table. I'm 6 feet high, and I could do it with an effort. So I had reason to think that only a man of unusual height could see the papers through the window. I entered your room, Mr. Soames, and still could make nothing of all the evidence, until you mentioned that Gilchrist was a long-distance jumper. Then the whole thing came to me at once. and I only needed some additional evidence, which I got very soon. What happened was this. This young fellow had spent his afternoon at the sports ground, where he had been practicing the jump. He returned, carrying his jumping shoes, the soles of which, as you know very well, have spikes in them. As he passed your window, he saw, by means of his great height, these papers on your writing table, and understood what they were. No harm would have been done had he not noticed the key, left in the door by the carelessness of your servant. A sudden impulse made him enter your room and see if there were indeed the examination papers. It was not a dangerous action. He could always pretend that he had simply come in to ask a question. Well, he forgot his honour when he saw the Greek text for the examination. He put his jumping shoes on the writing table. What was it that you put on the chair near the window? Gloves, answered the young man. Holmes looked at Bannister in triumph. He put his gloves on the chair, went on Holmes, and he took the examination papers, page by page, to the window table to copy them. He was sure that Mr. Soames would return by the main gate, and that he would suddenly see him. As we know, he came back by the side gate. Suddenly he heard Mr. Soames at the very door. There was no way by which he could escape. He forgot to take his gloves, but he caught up his shoes and rushed into the bedroom. The cut on the desk is slight at one side, but deeper in the direction of the bedroom door. That is enough to show us the direction in which he drew the shoes. Some of the clay round the spike was left on the desk, and a second ball of clay fell in the bedroom. I walked out to the sports ground this morning and saw that black clay is used in the jumping pit. I carried away some of it, together with some sawdust, which is used to prevent the athletes from slipping. Have I told the truth, Mr. Gilchrist? Yes, sir, it is true, he said. Good heavens! Have you got nothing to add? Cried Soames. Yes, sir, I have. I have a letter here which I wrote to you early this morning after a restless night. Of course I did not know then that my action was known to everyone. Here it is, sir. You will see that I have written. I've decided not to take the examination. I've found some work, and I shall start working at once. I am indeed pleased to hear that from you, Gilchrist, said Soames. But why did you change your plans? There is the man who sent me in the right path, said the student, pointing to Bannister. Come now, Bannister, said Holmes. It's clear now to all of us that only you could have let this young man out, since you were left in the room alone. That's quite clear. What is not quite clear is the reason for your action. The reason was simple enough, answered Bannister. Many years ago, I was a butler in the house of this young gentleman's father. When he died, I came to the college as a servant, but I never forgot the family. Well, sir, as I came into this room yesterday, when Mr. Soames was so much upset, the first thing I saw was Mr. Gilchrist's gloves lying in that chair. I knew those gloves well, and I understood immediately what they meant. If Mr. Soames saw them, Gilchrist would certainly be a lost man. I sat down in the chair, pretending that I felt very bad. When Mr. Soames went to you, Mr. Holmes, my poor young master came out of the bedroom and confessed it all to me. Wasn't it natural, sir, that I should save him? And wasn't it natural also that I should speak to him like a father, and make him understand that he must not profit by such an action? Can you blame me, sir? No, indeed, said Holmes heartily, jumping to his feet. Well, Soames, I think we have cleared your little problem up, and our breakfast awaits us at home. Come, Watson. As to you, Mr. Gilchrist, I hope a bright future awaits you. For once, you have fallen low. Let us see in the future how high you can rise.
Bret Harte, The Stolen Cigar Case. I found Hemlock Jones in the old Brook Street lodgings, musing before the fire. With the freedom of an old friend, I at once threw myself in my usual familiar attitude at his feet and gently caressed his boot. I was induced to do this for two reasons. One, that it enabled me to get a good look at his bent, concentrated face, and the other, that it seemed to indicate my reverence for his superhuman insight. So absorbed was he, even then, in tracking some mysterious clue, that he did not seem to notice me. But therein I was wrong, as I always was in my attempt to understand that powerful intellect. "It is raining," he said, without lifting his head. "You have been out, then?" I said quickly. "No, but I see that your umbrella is wet and that your overcoat has drops of water on it." I sat aghast at his penetration. After a pause, he said carelessly, as if dismissing the subject, "Besides, I hear the rain on the window. Listen." I listened. I could scarcely credit my ears, but there was the soft pattering of drops on the panes. It was evident there was no deceiving this man. "Have you been busy lately?" I asked, changing the subject. "What new problem, given up by Scotland Yard as inscrutable, has occupied that gigantic intellect?" He drew back his foot slightly and seemed to hesitate ere he returned it to its original position. Then he answered wearily, "Mere trifles, nothing to speak of. The Prince Coopoli has been here to get my advice regarding the disappearance of certain rubies from the Kremlin. The Rajah of Pootabad, after vainly beheading his entire bodyguard, has been obliged to seek my assistance to recover a jeweled sword. The Grand Duchess of Pretzel-Braunswig is desirous of discovering where her husband was on the night of February 14th. And last night," he lowered his voice slightly, "a lodger in this very house, meeting me on the stairs, wanted to know why they didn't answer his bell." I could not help smiling, until I saw a frown gathering on his inscrutable forehead. "Pray remember," he said coldly, "that it was through such an apparently trivial question that I found out why Paul Farrell killed his wife and what happened to Jones." I became dumb at once. He paused for a moment, and then suddenly, changing back to his usual pitiless, analytical style, he said, "When I say these are trifles, they are so in comparison to an affair that is now before me. A crime has been committed, and, singularly enough, against myself. You start," he said. "You wonder who would have dared to attempt it. So did I. Nevertheless, it has been done. I have been robbed." "You robbed? You! Hemlock Jones, the terror of peculators!" I gasped in amazement, arising and gripping the table as I faced him. "Yes. Listen, I would confess it to no other, but you, who have followed my career, who know my methods, you, for whom I have partly lifted the veil that conceals my plans from ordinary humanity, you, who have for years rapturously accepted my confidences, passionately admired my inductions and inferences, placed yourself at my beck and call, become my slave, groveled at my feet, given up your practice except those few unremunerative and rapidly decreasing patients to whom, in moments of abstraction over my problems, you have administered strychnine for quinine and arsenic for Epsom salts, you, who have sacrificed anything and everybody to me. You I make my confidant." I arose and embraced him warmly, yet he was already so engrossed in thought that at the same moment he mechanically placed his hand upon his watch chain, as if to consult the time. "Sit down," he said. "Have a cigar?" "I have given up cigar smoking," I said. "Why?" he asked. I hesitated and perhaps colored. I had really given it up because, with my diminished practice, it was too expensive. I could afford only a pipe. "I prefer a pipe," I said laughingly. "But tell me of this robbery. What have you lost?" He arose, and planting himself before the fire with his hands under his coat-tails, looked down upon me reflectively for a moment. "Do you remember the cigar case presented to me by the Turkish ambassador for discovering the missing favorite of the Grand Vizier and the fifth chorus girl at the Hilarity Theatre? It was that one. I mean the cigar case. It was encrusted with diamonds." "And the largest one had been supplanted by paste," I said. "Ah," he said, with a reflective smile, "you know that?" "You told me yourself. I remember considering it a proof of your extraordinary perception. But, by Jove, you don't mean to say that you've lost it?" He was silent for a moment. "No, it has been stolen, it is true, but I shall find it. And by myself alone. In your profession, my dear fellow, when a member is seriously ill, he does not prescribe for himself, but calls in a brother doctor. Therein we differ. I shall take this matter in my own hands." "And where could you find better?" I said enthusiastically. "I should say the cigar case is as good as recovered already." "I shall remind you of that again," he said lightly. "And now, to show you my confidence in your judgment, in spite of my determination to pursue this alone, I am willing to listen to any suggestions from you." He drew a memorandum book from his pocket, and, with a grave smile, took up his pencil. I could scarcely believe my senses. He, the great Hemlock Jones, accepting suggestions from a humble individual like myself. I kissed his hand reverently and began in a joyous tone. "First, I should advertise, offering a reward. I should give the same intimation in handbills distributed at the pubs and the pastry cooks. I should next visit the different pawnbrokers. I should give notice at the police station. I should examine the servants. I should thoroughly search the house and my own pockets. I speak relatively," I added with a laugh. "Of course, I mean your own." He gravely made an entry of these details. "Perhaps," I added, "you have already done this." "Perhaps," he returned, enigmatically. "Now, my dear friend," he continued, putting the notebook in his pocket and rising, "would you excuse me for a few moments? Make yourself perfectly at home until I return. There may be some things," he added, with a sweep of his hand toward his heterogeneously filled shelves, "that may interest you and while away the time. There are pipes and tobacco in that corner." Then, nodding to me with the same inscrutable face, he left the room. I was too well accustomed to his methods to think much of his unceremonious withdrawal, and made no doubt he was off to investigate some clue which had suddenly occurred to his active intelligence. Left to myself, I cast a cursory glance over his shelves. There were a number of small glass jars containing earthly substances, labeled pavement and road sweepings from the principal thoroughfares and suburbs of London, with the subdirections for identifying foot tracks. There were several other jars labeled fluff from omnibus and road car seats, coconut fiber and rope strands from mattings in public places, cigarette stumps and match ends from floor of Palace Theatre, row A, 1 to 50. Everywhere were evidences of this wonderful man's system and perspicacity. I was thus engaged when I heard the slight creaking of a door, and I looked up as a stranger entered. He was a rough-looking man with a shabby overcoat and a still more disreputable muffler around his throat and the lower part of his face. Considerably annoyed at his intrusion, I turned upon him rather sharply when, with a mumbled, growling apology for mistaking the room, he shuffled out again and closed the door. I followed him quickly to the landing and saw that he disappeared down the stairs. With my mind full of the robbery, the incident made a singular impression upon me. I knew my friend's habit of hasty absences from his room in his moments of deep inspiration. It was only too probable that, with his powerful intellect and magnificent perceptive genius concentrated on one subject, he should be careless of his own belongings, and no doubt even forget to take the ordinary precaution of locking up his drawers. I tried one or two and found that I was right, although for some reason I was unable to open one to its fullest extent. The handles were sticky, as if someone had opened them with dirty fingers. Knowing Hemlock's fastidious cleanliness, I resolved to inform him of this circumstance, but I forgot it. Alas, but I am anticipating my story. His absence was strangely prolonged. I at last seated myself by the fire, and lulled by warmth and the patter of the rain on the window, I fell asleep. I may have dreamt, for during my sleep I had a vague semi-consciousness as of hands being softly pressed in my pockets, no doubt induced by the story of the robbery. When I came fully to my senses, I found Hemlock Jones sitting on the other side of the hearth, his deeply concentrated gaze fixed on the fire. "I found you so comfortably asleep that I could not bear to awaken you," he said, with a smile. I rubbed my eyes. "And what news?" I asked. "How have you succeeded?" "Better than I expected," he said. "And I think," he added, tapping his notebook, "I owe much to you." Deeply gratified, I awaited more, but in vain. I ought to have remembered that in his moods Hemlock Jones was reticence himself. I told him simply of the strange intrusion, but he only laughed. Later, when I arose to go, he looked at me playfully. "If you were a married man," he said, "I would advise you not to go home until you had brushed your sleeve. There are a few short brown sealskin hairs on the inner side of your forearm, just where they would have adhered if your arm had encircled a sealskin coat with some pressure." "For once you are at fault," I said triumphantly. "The hair is my own. As you will perceive, I have just had it cut at the hairdresser's, and no doubt this arm projected beyond the apron." He frowned slightly, yet nevertheless, on my turning to go, he embraced me warmly. A rare exhibition in that man of ice. He even helped me on with my overcoat, and pulled out and smoothed down the flaps of my pockets. He was particular, too, in fitting my arm in my overcoat sleeve, shaking the sleeve down from the armhole to the cuff with his deft fingers. "Come again soon," he said, clapping me on the back. "At any and all times," I said enthusiastically. "I only ask 10 minutes, twice a day, to eat a crust at my office, and 4 hours sleep at night, and the rest of my time is devoted to you, always, as you know." "It is indeed," he said, with his impenetrable smile. Nevertheless, I did not find him at home when I next called. One afternoon, when nearing my own home, I met him in one of his favorite disguises, a long blue swallow-tailed coat, striped cotton trousers, large turnover collar, blackened face, and white hat, carrying a tambourine. Of course, to others the disguise was perfect, although it was known to myself, and I passed him, according to an old understanding between us, without the slightest recognition, trusting to a later explanation. At another time, as I was making a professional visit to the wife of a publican at the East End, I saw him in the disguise of a broken-down artisan, looking into the window of an adjacent pawn-shop. I was delighted to see that he was evidently following my suggestions, and in my joy I ventured to tip him a wink. It was abstractedly returned. 2 days later I received a note appointing a meeting at his lodgings that night. That meeting, alas, was the one memorable occurrence of my life, and the last meeting I ever had with Hemlock Jones. I will try to set it down calmly, though my pulses still throb with the recollection of it. I found him standing before the fire, with that look upon his face which I had seen only once or twice in our acquaintance, a look which I may call an absolute concatenation of inductive and deductive ratiocination, from which all that was human, tender, or sympathetic was absolutely discharged. He was simply an icy algebraic symbol. Indeed, his whole being was concentrated to that extent that his clothes fitted loosely and his head was absolutely so much reduced in size by his mental compression that his hat tipped back from his forehead and literally hung on his massive ears. After I had entered, he locked the doors, fastened the windows, and even placed a chair before the chimney. As I watched these significant precautions with absorbing interest, he suddenly drew a revolver, and pressing it to my temple, said in low, icy tones, "Hand over that cigar case." Even in my bewilderment, my reply was truthful, spontaneous, and involuntary. "I haven't got it," I said. He smiled bitterly and threw down his revolver. I expected that reply. "Then let me now confront you with something more awful, more deadly, more relentless and convincing than that mere lethal weapon. The damning inductive and deductive proofs of your guilt." He drew from his pocket a roll of paper and a notebook. "But surely," I gasped, "you're joking. You could not for a moment believe—" "Silence. Sit down." I obeyed. "You have condemned yourself," he went on pitilessly, "condemned yourself on my processes. Processes familiar to you, applauded by you, accepted by you for years. We will go back to the time when you first saw the cigar case." "Your expressions," he said in cold, deliberate tones, consulting his paper, "were, 'How beautiful! I wish it were mine.' This was your first step in crime and my first indication. From 'I wish it were mine' to 'I will have it mine.' And the mere detail, 'How can I make it mine?' the advance was obvious." Silence. "But as in my methods it was necessary that there should be an overwhelming inducement to the crime, that unholy admiration of yours for the mere trinket itself was not enough. You are a smoker of cigars." "But I burst out passionately, "I told you I had given up smoking cigars." "Fool," he said coldly. "That is the second time you have committed yourself. Of course you told me. What more natural than for you to blazon forth that prepared and unsolicited statement to prevent accusation? Yet, as I said before, even that wretched attempt to cover up your tracks was not enough. I still had to find that overwhelming, impelling motive necessary to affect a man like you. That motive I found in the strongest of all impulses. Love, I suppose you would call it." He added bitterly, "That night you called. You had brought the most conclusive proofs of it on your sleeve." "But—" I almost screamed. "Silence!" he thundered. "I know what you would say. You would say that even if you had embraced some young person in a sealskin coat, what had that to do with the robbery? Let me tell you, then, that that sealskin coat represented the quality and character of your fatal entanglement. You bartered your honor for it. That stolen cigar case was the purchaser of the sealskin coat." "Silence! Having thoroughly established your motive, I now proceed to the commission of the crime itself. Ordinary people would have begun with that, with an attempt to discover the whereabouts of the missing object. These are not my methods." So overpowering was his penetration that, although I knew myself innocent, I licked my lips with avidity to hear the further details of this lucid exposition of my crime. "You committed that theft the night I showed you the cigar case, and after I had carelessly thrown it in that drawer, you were sitting in that chair, and I had arisen to take something from that shelf. In that instant, you secured your booty without rising." "Silence! Do you remember when I helped you on with your overcoat the other night? I was particular about fitting your arm in. While doing so, I measured your arm with a spring tape measure from the shoulder to the cuff. A later visit to your tailor confirmed that measurement. It proved to be the exact distance between your chair and that drawer." I sat stunned. "The rest are more corroborative details. You were again tampering with the drawer when I discovered you doing so. Do not start. The stranger that blundered into the room with a muffler on was myself. More, I had placed a little soap on the drawer handles when I purposely left you alone. The soap was on your hand when I shook it at parting. I softly felt your pockets when you were asleep for further developments. I embraced you when you left, that I might feel if you had the cigar case or any other articles hidden on your body. This confirmed me in the belief that you had already disposed of it in the manner and for the purpose I have shown you. As I still believed you capable of remorse and confession, I twice allowed you to see I was on your track, once in the garb of an itinerant Negro minstrel, and the second time as a workman, looking in the window of the pawn-shop where you pledged your booty. But, I burst out, if you had asked the pawnbroker, you would have seen how unjust— Fool, he hissed. That was one of your suggestions, to search the pawnshops. Do you suppose I followed any of your suggestions, the suggestions of a thief? On the contrary, they told me what to avoid. And I suppose, I said bitterly, you have not even searched your drawer? No, he said calmly. I was, for the first time, really vexed. I went to the nearest drawer and pulled it out sharply. It stuck as it had before, leaving a part of the drawer unopened. By working it, however, I discovered that it was impeded by some obstacle that had slipped to the upper part of the drawer and held it firmly fast. Inserting my hand, I pulled out the impeding object. It was the missing cigar case. I turned to him with a cry of joy, but I was appalled at his expression. A look of contempt was now added to his acute, penetrating gaze. I have been mistaken, he said slowly. I had not allowed for your weakness and cowardice. I thought too highly of you, even in your guilt, but I see now why you tampered with that drawer the other night. By some inexplicable means, possibly another theft, you took the cigar case out of pawn and, like a whipped hound, restored it to me in this feeble, clumsy fashion. You thought to deceive me, Hemlock Jones. More, you thought to destroy my infallibility. Go. I give you your liberty. I shall not summon the 3 policemen who wait in the adjoining room, but out of my sight forever. As I stood once more dazed and petrified, he took me firmly by the ear and led me into the hall, closing the door behind him. This reopened presently, wide enough to permit him to thrust out my hat, overcoat, umbrella, and overshoes, and then closed against me forever. I never saw him again. I am bound to say, however, that thereafter my business increased. I recovered much of my old practice, and a few of my patients recovered also. I became rich. I had a brougham and a house in the West End, but I often wondered, pondering on that wonderful man's penetration and insight, if in some lapse of consciousness I had not really stolen his cigar case.
CD 2. Philomel Cottage, Agatha Cristie. Goodbye, my love. Goodbye, dearest. Alex Martin leaned over the small garden gate and watched the figure of her husband grow smaller as he walked down the road in the direction of the village. Soon he turned a bend and disappeared. But Alex still stayed in the same position, with a dreamy, far-away look in her eyes. Alex Martin was not beautiful. She was not even particularly pretty, but there was a joy and softness in her face which her friends from the past would not have recognized. Alex had not had an easy life. For 15 years, from the age of 18 until she was 33, she had had to look after herself, and for 7 years of that time her sick mother as well. She had worked as a secretary, and she had been neat and businesslike. But the struggle had brought lines to her young face. It was true that she had had a sort of love affair with Dick Windyford, another clerk. Although they had seemed to be just good friends, Alex knew in her heart that he loved her. But Dick had to work hard in order to save enough money to send a younger brother to a good school. He could not think of marriage yet. Then, suddenly, the girl was delivered from the dullness of her everyday life in the most surprising manner. A cousin died and left all her money, a few £1,000s, to Alex. This gave Alex freedom, an easier life, and the ability to make her own decisions. Now she and Dick did not need to wait any longer to be married. But Dick behaved strangely. He had never spoken directly to Alex of his love for her, and now he seemed to have less desire than ever to do so. He avoided her and became silent and unhappy. Alex was quick to realize the truth. She had become a wealthy woman, and Dick's pride would not allow him to ask her to be his wife. She liked him none the worse for it, and was actually thinking about suggesting marriage herself, when the second surprising thing happened to her. She met Gerald Martin at a friend's house. He fell violently in love with her, and within a week he had asked her to marry him. Alex, who had always considered herself calm and sensible, was completely swept off her feet. She had, by chance, found a way to excite Dick Windford's emotions. He had come to her almost speechless with anger. "The man's a complete stranger to you. You know nothing about him." "I know that I love him." "How can you know in a week?" "It doesn't take everyone 11 years to find out that they're in love with a girl," cried Alex angrily. His face went white. "I've loved you ever since I met you. I thought that you felt the same about me." Alex was truthful. "I thought so too," she admitted, "but that was because I didn't know what real love was." Then Dick had exploded again, shouting first prayers and then threats against the man who had taken his place. Alex was shocked to see how strong the feelings were of the man whom she had thought that she knew so well. As she leaned on the gate of the little house on this sunny morning, her thoughts went back to that conversation. She had been married for a month, and she was wonderfully happy. But now and again there were moments of anxiety which darkened her perfect happiness. And the cause of that anxiety was Dick Windford. 3 times since her marriage she had dreamed the same dream. Although the place was different on each occasion, the main facts were always the same. She saw her husband lying dead, and Dick Windford standing over him, and she knew quite clearly that it was Dick who had struck him down. But if that was terrible, there was something more terrible still, although in the dream it seemed completely natural. She, Alex Martin, was glad that her husband was dead. She stretched out grateful hands to the murderer, and sometimes she thanked him. The dream always ended in the same way, with herself held in Dick Windford's arms. She had said nothing about this dream to her husband, but secretly it troubled her more than she liked to admit. Was it a warning? A warning against Dick Windford? Alex was woken from her thoughts by the sharp sound of the telephone ringing in the house. She went inside and picked up the receiver. Suddenly she felt faint and put out her hand against the wall. "Who did you say was speaking?" "Why, Alex, what's the matter with your voice? I hardly recognized it. It's Dick." "Oh," said Alex. "Oh, where are you?" "At the Traveller's Arms. That's the right name, isn't it? Or don't you even know of the existence of your village inn? I'm on holiday and doing a bit of fishing here. Would you have any objections if I came to see you both this evening after dinner?" "No," said Alex sharply. "You mustn't come." There was a pause, and then Dick spoke again. "I beg your pardon," he said formally. "Of course I won't trouble you." Alex interrupted quickly. He must think that her behaviour was strange, and it was. "I only meant to say that we are busy tonight," she explained, trying to make her voice sound as natural as possible. Will you come to dinner tomorrow night?" But Dick had noticed the lack of warmth in her voice. "Thanks very much," he said, as formally as before, "but I may leave at any time. I'm expecting to be joined by a friend. Goodbye, Alex." He paused, and then added quickly, with his old friendliness, "Best of luck to you, my dear." Alex put the phone down with a feeling of relief. "He mustn't come here," she repeated to herself. "He mustn't come here. Oh, what a fool I am to get into a state like this. But even so, I'm glad that he's not coming." She picked up an old hat from a table and went out into the garden again, pausing to look up at the name which was cut into the stone above the front door. Philomel Cottage. "It's a strange name, isn't it?" she had said to Gerald once before they were married. He had laughed. "You little town girl," he had said lovingly. "I don't believe that you've ever heard a nightingale. I'm glad that you haven't. Nightingales should only sing for lovers. We'll hear them together on a summer's evening, outside our own home." And when Alex, standing in the doorway of their home, remembered how they had heard them, she smiled happily. It was Gerald who had found Philomel Cottage. He had come to Alex full of excitement about it. He told her that he had found the perfect house for them, a real jewel of a place. And when Alex had seen it, she, too, fell in love with it. It was true that it was in rather a lonely position. It was 2 miles from the nearest village, but the house itself was wonderful. It was attractive to look at, and it had a comfortable bathroom, a good hot water system, electric light and telephone. But then they had a great disappointment. Gerald found out that the owner, although a rich man, would not rent it to them. He would only sell it. Gerald Martin had plenty of family money, but he was only able to use the income from it. He could lay his hands on no more than £1,000. The owner wanted 3,000. But Alex, who had set her heart on the house, suddenly stepped in. She gave half of her money in order to buy the home. So, Philomel Cottage had become their own, and Alex had not felt for a minute that she had made the wrong choice. It was true that servants did not like the loneliness of the country. Actually, at the moment they had none at all, but Alex, who had had little home life before, thoroughly enjoyed cooking lovely meals and looking after the house. The garden, which was well stocked with the most beautiful flowers, was cared for by an old man from the village who came twice a week. As she turned the corner of the house, Alex was surprised to see the old gardener busy in the flower beds. She was surprised because his days for work were Mondays and Fridays, and today was Wednesday. "What are you doing here, George?" she asked, as she came towards him. "I thought you'd be surprised, but there's a country show near here on Friday, So I said to myself that neither Mr. Martin nor his good wife would mind if I came for once on a Wednesday instead of a Friday. "That's quite all right," said Alex. "I hope that you'll enjoy yourself at the show." "I intend to," said George, simply. "But I did think, too, that I'd see you before you went away to find out what you want me to do with the flower borders. You haven't any idea when you'll be back, I suppose?" "But I'm not going away." George looked at her in surprise. "Aren't you going to London tomorrow?" "No. What gave you such an idea?" "I met Master going down to the village yesterday. He told me that you were both going away to London tomorrow, and that it was uncertain when you'd be back again." "Nonsense," said Alex, laughing. "You must have misunderstood him." Just the same, it made her think about exactly what Gerald could have said for the old man to make such a strange mistake. Going to London? She never wanted to go to London again. "I hate London," she said suddenly and bitterly. "Ah," said George calmly. "I must have been mistaken somehow. But he said it quite plainly, it seemed to me. I'm glad that you're staying here. I don't approve of all this moving about, and I don't like London at all. I've never needed to go there. Too many motor cars. That's the trouble these days. As soon as people have got a motor car, they can't seem to stay still anywhere. Mr. Ames, who used to have this cottage, was a nice, peaceful gentleman, until he bought one of those things. He hadn't had it a month before he put this cottage up for sale. He'd spent a lot of money on it, too, putting in electric light and things like that. 'You'll never get your money back,' I said to him. 'But,' he said to me, 'I'll get £2,000 for this house.' And he certainly did." "He got 3,000, said Alex, smiling. 2,000, repeated George. "There was talk at the time about the amount that he wanted." "It really was 3,000, said Alex. "Ladies never understand figures," said George firmly. "You're not going to tell me that Mr. Ames asked you for 3,000? "He didn't ask me," said Alex. "He asked my husband." George bent down again to his flower bed. "The price was 2,000, he said with determination. Alex did not argue with him any more. She moved across to one of the other beds and began to pick a bunch of flowers. As she moved towards the house, Alex noticed a small dark green object lying on the ground. She stopped and picked it up, recognizing it as her husband's notebook. She opened it and looked rapidly through it with some amusement. Almost from the beginning of her married life with Gerald, she had realized that, although he was quick and emotional, he was also unexpectedly neat and well-organized. He demanded that his meals were served on time and always planned his day with great care. As she looked through the notebook, Alex smiled to see the entry for the 14th of May. "Marry Alex, St. Peter's, 2:30. She laughed and turned the pages. Suddenly she stopped. Wednesday, the 18th of June. That's today. In the space for that day, Gerald had written in his neat, exact hand, 9 p.m. Nothing else. What did Gerald plan to do at 9 p.m.? Alex thought about it. She smiled to herself as she realized that if this had been a detective story, the notebook would have contained some unpleasant surprises. One of them would certainly have been the name of another woman. She turned back the pages carelessly. There were dates, appointments, short notes on business matters, but only one woman's name, her own. But as she slipped the book into her pocket and carried her flowers into the house, she felt a slight anxiety. She remembered Dick Windyford's words almost as though he were beside her repeating them. "The man's a complete stranger to you. You know nothing about him." It was true. What did she know about him? After all, Gerald was 40. In 40 years, there must have been other women in his life. Alex shook herself impatiently. She must not think like this. She had a more urgent matter to deal with. Ought she or ought she not to tell her husband that Dick Windyford had telephoned her? It was just possible that Gerald had already met him in the village. But in that case, he would be sure to mention it to her immediately on his return, and she could then safely tell him about the phone call. If he did not, what? Alex felt a strong desire to say nothing about it. If she told him, he was sure to suggest that they should invite Dick Windyford to Philomel Cottage. Then she would have to explain that Dick had asked if he could come, and that she had made an excuse to prevent him. And when he asked her why she had done so, what could she say? Should she tell him her dream? But he would only laugh, or, to make matters worse, he would see that she thought it was important. In the end, although she felt rather ashamed, Alex decided to say nothing. It was the first secret that she had ever kept from her husband, and she felt very uncomfortable about it. When she heard Gerald returning from the village at lunchtime, Alex hid her confusion by hurrying into the kitchen and pretending to be busy with the cooking. She realized immediately that Gerald had not seen Dick Windyford. She was relieved, but she remained a little anxious because she had to prevent Gerald from learning what had happened. It was not until they had finished their simple evening meal and were sitting in the living room with the windows open in order to let in the sweet night air and the smell of the flowers that Alex remembered the notebook. "Here's something that you've been watering the flowers with," she said, and she threw it to him. "I dropped it in the flower bed, did I?" "Yes. I know all your secrets now." "Not guilty," said Gerald, shaking his head. "What about your secret business at 9 o'clock tonight?" "Oh, that." He seemed surprised for a moment, and then he smiled, as if he had had a particularly amusing thought. "It's a meeting with a specially nice girl, Alex. She's got brown hair and blue eyes, and she's very like you." "I don't understand," said Alex, pretending to be severe. "You're avoiding the point." "No, I'm not. As a matter of fact, it's a note to remind myself that I'm going to develop some photographs tonight, and I want you to help me." Gerald Martin was very interested in photography and had an excellent but rather old camera. He developed his photographs in a small room under the house, which he had fitted up for that purpose. "And the developing must be done at 9 o'clock exactly," said Alex, laughing. Gerald looked a little annoyed. "My dear girl," he said, "one should always plan a thing for a certain time. Then one does one's work quickly and properly." Alex sat for a minute or two in silence, watching her husband. He sat back in his chair, smoking, with his dark head leaning back and the clear-cut lines of his face standing out against the dark background. And suddenly, Alex felt a wave of fear sweep over her, so that she cried out before she could stop herself. "Oh, Gerald, I wish that I knew more about you." Her husband looked at her in surprise. "But my dear Alex, you do know all about me. I've told you about when I was a boy in Northumberland, about my life in South Africa, and about these last 10 years in Canada, which have made me successful." "Oh, business," said Alex, with a wave of her hand to show her lack of interest. Gerald laughed suddenly. "I know what you mean. Love affairs. You women are all the same." Alex felt her throat go dry as she said nervously, "Well, but there must have been love affairs. If I only knew—" There was silence again for a minute or two. Gerald Martin looked worried and undecided. When he spoke seriously, without any sign of his former light-hearted manner. "Alex, do you think that it's wise to want to know so much? Yes, there have been women in my life. If I said there were not, you wouldn't believe me. But I can swear to you that not one of them was important to me." His voice was so sincere that Alex was comforted. "Are you satisfied, Alex?" he asked with a smile. "What's made you think of this tonight especially?" Alex got up and began to walk about the room. "Oh, I don't know," she said. "I've been feeling anxious all day." "That's strange," said Gerald in a low voice, as though he was speaking to himself. "That's very strange." "Why is it strange?" "Oh, my dear girl, don't turn on me like that. I only said that it was strange because, as a rule, you're so happy and cheerful." Alex forced herself to smile. "Everything's done its best to annoy me today," she admitted. "Even old George had got hold of some strange idea that we were going away to London. He said that you had told him so." "Where did you see him?" asked Gerald sharply. "He came to work today, instead of Friday." "The stupid old fool," said Gerald angrily. Alex looked at him in surprise. Her husband's face was twisted with violent anger. She had never seen him like this. When Gerald noticed her shocked expression, he made an effort to regain control of himself. "Well, he is a stupid old fool," he complained. "What can you have said to make him think that?" I never said anything. At least, oh yes, I remember. I made some weak joke about going off to London in the morning, and I suppose that he believed me. Or perhaps he didn't hear me properly. You corrected him, of course?" He waited anxiously for her reply. "Of course. But he's the sort of old man who doesn't accept correction easily." She told him how certain George had been about the price of the house. Gerald was silent for a minute or two. Then he said slowly, "Ames was prepared to take £2,000 immediately and to be paid the remaining £1,000 in small amounts over several months. That's how that mistake started, I expect." "Very likely," Alex agreed. Then she looked up at the clock and pointed to it with a laugh. We ought to be getting on with the developing, Gerald. It's 9:05. A very strange smile appeared on Gerald Martin's face. "I've changed my mind," he said quietly. "I shan't do any photography tonight." A woman's mind is a strange thing. When Alex went to bed on that Wednesday night, her mind was as peaceful and happy as it had been before Dick Windford's phone call. But by the evening of the following day, she was feeling anxious again. Dick had not telephoned again, but she felt what she supposed must be his influence at work. Again and again she seemed to hear those words of his. "The man's a complete stranger to you. You know nothing about him." And with them came the memory of her husband's face and the way that he had said, "Alex, do you think that it's wise to want to know so much?" Why had he said that? There had been a warning in those words. It was as though he had said, "You had better not try to find out about my past life, Alex. You may get an unpleasant shock if you do." By Friday morning, Alex felt certain that there had been a woman in Gerald's life, and that he had taken great care to hide the fact from her. Her jealousy, which had developed slowly, now became violent. Was it a woman that he had been going to meet that night at 9 p.m, when he had said that he had been planning to develop photographs? Had he been lying? 3 days ago she would have sworn that she knew her husband completely. Now it seemed to her that he was in fact a stranger to her. She remembered his unreasonable anger against old George, which had been so different from his usual good temper. Perhaps it was a small thing, but it showed her that she did not really know the man who was her husband. On Friday afternoon, there were several little things that Alex needed from the village. She suggested that she should go and buy them while Gerald remained in the garden. But rather to her surprise, he objected strongly to this plan, and stated that he would go himself while she remained at home. Alex was forced to give way to him, but his determination surprised and worried her. Why was he so anxious to prevent her from going to the village? Suddenly, she thought of an explanation which made the whole thing clear. Was it not possible that, although he had said nothing to her, Gerald actually had met Dick Windford? Her own jealousy had only developed since her marriage. The same thing might have happened with Gerald. He might be anxious to prevent her from seeing Dick Windford again. This explanation fitted the facts so well and was so comforting to Alex's troubled mind that she accepted it eagerly. But by tea-time, she was again feeling uncomfortable. She was struggling with an idea that, to her shame, had come to her since Gerald left. At last, after she had told herself repeatedly that she ought to tidy Gerald's dressing room, she went upstairs. She took a duster with her to pretend that she was just being a good housewife. "If I was only sure," she repeated to herself. "If I could only be sure." She tried to believe that Gerald would have destroyed anything to do with a woman in his past life. But the desire to find out for herself grew stronger and stronger, until at last she could no longer stop herself. Although she felt deeply ashamed of herself, she searched the drawers. hunting through packets of letters and papers and even the pockets of her husband's clothes. Only 2 drawers escaped her. The lower drawer of the dressing table and the small right-hand drawer of the writing desk were both locked. But Alex had by now lost all her shame. She was certain that in one of those drawers she would find something connected with this imaginary woman from the past who was driving her crazy. She remembered that Gerald had left his keys lying carelessly on the table downstairs. She brought them upstairs and tried them one by one. The 3rd key fitted the drawer of the writing desk. Alex pulled it open eagerly. There was a cheque-book and some money in there, and at the back of the drawer a packet of letters tied up with a piece of string. Alex was breathing unsteadily as she untied the string. Then her face turned red, and she dropped the letters back into the drawer, closing and relocking it. The letters were her own, which she had written to Gerald Martin before she married him. Then she turned to the dressing table. She did not expect to find what she was looking for, but she wanted to feel that she had not left the search unfinished. Alex was annoyed to find that none of the keys in Gerald's bunch fitted this particular drawer. But she was determined not to be defeated. She went round the other rooms in the house and brought back a collection of keys with her. Finally, she discovered that the key of the cupboard in another room also fitted the drawers of the dressing table. She unlocked the lower drawer and pulled it open. But there was nothing in it, except a roll of old and dirty newspaper cuttings. Alex breathed more freely. But she looked quickly at the cuttings, because she was interested to know what subject had interested Gerald so much that he had kept them. They were nearly all from American newspapers of about 7 years before, and they dealt with the trial of Charles Lemaitre. Lemaitre had been suspected of marrying women in order to murder them for their money. A skeleton had been found beneath the floor of one of the houses which he had rented, and most of the women that he had married had never been heard of again. He had defended himself in court with the greatest skill, and had been helped by some of the best lawyers in the United States. The court had been unable to prove the main charge of murder, but had found him guilty of several smaller charges, and he had been put in prison. Alex remembered the excitement caused by the case at the time, and again some 3 years later, when Lemaitre had escaped from prison. He had never been caught. The English newspapers had discussed at great length the character of the man and his strange power over women. They had described his excitable behaviour in court, and mentioned the occasional sudden illnesses caused by his heart condition. There was a picture of him in one of the cuttings, and Alex looked closely at it. It showed a thoughtful, bearded gentleman. Who was it that the face reminded her of? Suddenly, with a shock, she realized that it was Gerald himself. The eyes were just like his. Perhaps he had kept the cutting for that reason. She began to read the account beside the picture. It seemed that certain dates had been written in Lemaitre's notebook, and it was suggested that these were the dates on which the women had been murdered. In court, a witness had stated that Lemaitre could be recognized by the mark of an old injury on the inside of his left wrist. Alex dropped the papers and put out a hand to support herself. Her husband had a mark on the inside of his left wrist. The room seemed to spin around her. Gerald Martin was Charles Lemaitre. She knew it and accepted it in a flash. Unconnected facts suddenly fitted together. The money that had been paid for the house was all hers, and she had trusted him with the rest of her money. Even her dream now had a meaning. Deep down, although she had never consciously known it, she had always feared Gerald Martin. She had wished to escape from him, and had, unconsciously, wanted Dick Winderford's help. That, too, was why she had accepted the truth so easily, without doubt or further thought. Lemaitre had meant to kill her, too. Very soon, perhaps. She almost cried out as she remembered something. Wednesday, 9 p.m. The room under the house, with the floor stones, which could be raised so easily. Once before, he had buried a body under a floor. It had all been planned for Wednesday night. But was he crazy, writing down the date and time in his notebook? No. Gerald always wrote down his business appointments. To him, murder was a form of business. But what had saved her? What could possibly have saved her? Had he changed his mind at the last minute? No. She realized immediately. Old George. She understood now her husband's burst of uncontrollable anger. No doubt he had prepared the way by telling as many people as possible that they were going to London the next day. Then George had come to work unexpectedly. He had mentioned London to her, and she had said that the story was untrue. It would have been too risky to murder her that night, if old George was likely to repeat that conversation. But what an escape! If she had not happened to mention that little matter... Alex trembled. But she had no time to waste. She must get away immediately, before he came back. She quickly replaced the roll of cuttings in the drawer, shut it and locked it. And then she froze. She heard the noise of the garden gate. Her husband had returned. For a moment, Alex did not move. Then she walked softly to the window and looked out from behind the shelter of the curtain. Yes, it was her husband. He was smiling to himself and singing a little song. He held in his hand an object which almost stopped the beating of her heart. It was a new spade. Alex understood immediately. It would be tonight. But there was still a chance. Gerald, still singing, went round to the back of the house. She didn't wait. She ran down the stairs and out of the house. But just as she came out of the front door, her husband reappeared round the other side of the house.
"Hello," he said. "Where are you running off to in such a hurry?"
Alex did her best to remain as calm as usual. Her opportunity had gone for the moment, but it would come again later if she took care not to make him suspicious. Even now, perhaps. "I was going to walk to the end of the road and back," she said in a voice which sounded weak and uncertain to her own ears.
"All right,"
said Gerald.
I'll come with you.
No, please, Gerald. I'm not feeling too well. I'd rather go alone. He looked at her closely. She thought she saw a flash of suspicion in his eyes.
What's the matter with you, Alex? You're pale, and you're shaking.
Nothing. She forced herself to smile and sound confident. I've got a headache, that's all. A walk will do me good.
Well, it's no good your saying that you don't want me, said Gerald, laughing. I'm coming, whether you want me or not.
She did not dare object any more. If he suspected that she knew... With an effort, she managed to regain something of her normal manner. But she had an uncomfortable feeling that he was looking at her every now and then out of the corner of his eye, as if his suspicions had still not completely disappeared. When they returned to the house, he made her lie down, and he cared for her like any loving husband. Alex felt as helpless as if she was in a trap with her hands and feet tied. He would not leave her alone for a minute. He went with her to the kitchen and helped her to bring in the simple cold dishes which she had already prepared. She knew now that she was fighting for her life. She was alone with this man. Help was miles away, and she was completely in his power. Her only chance was to calm his suspicions so that he would leave her alone for long enough to reach the telephone in the hall and call for help. That was her only hope now. She had a moment of hope as she remembered how he had given up his plan before. She was on the point of telling him that Dick Winderford was coming up to see them that evening, but she realized that this would be useless. The murderer would not be stopped a second time. There was a determination in his calm behaviour that made her feel sick with fear. He would simply murder her immediately and telephone Dick Winderford with the story that they had been called away suddenly. Oh, if Dick Winderford would come to the house this evening, if Dick... A sudden idea came to her mind. She looked sharply at her husband, as though she was afraid that he would understand what was in her mind. Now that she had formed a plan, her courage returned, and she was able to behave naturally again. She made the coffee, and they took it outside as they always did when it was a fine evening.
Oh, yes, said Gerald suddenly. We'll do those photographs later.
Alex's blood seemed to go cold, but she simply replied, "Can't you manage alone? I'm rather tired tonight."
It won't take long, he smiled to himself. And I can promise you that you won't feel tired afterwards.
The words seemed to amuse him. Alex closed her eyes. She had to carry out her plan now. "I'm just going to telephone the butcher," she told him.
The butcher? At this time of night?
"Oh, of course, his shop's shut. But I can ring him at home. Tomorrow is Saturday, and I forgot to ask him to bring me some meat for the weekend. The dear old man will do anything for me." She passed quickly into the house, closing the door behind her. She heard Gerald say,
"Don't shut the door,"
and replied cheerfully, "Are you afraid that I'm going to make love to the butcher?" As soon as she was inside, she picked up the phone and asked for the number of the Traveller's Arms. She was connected immediately. "Mr. Windyford? Is he still there? Can I speak to him?" Then her heart began to beat more quickly. The door was opened, and her husband came into the hall. "Do go away, Gerald," she said angrily. "I hate anyone to listen when I'm telephoning." He just laughed and sat down in a chair.
"Are you sure it's really the butcher that you're telephoning?" he laughed.
Alex now felt real terror. Her plan had failed. In a minute, Dick Windyford would come to the phone. Should she take a risk and cry out for help? In her anxiety, she began to press one of the buttons on the phone, up and down, and immediately another plan flashed into her head. When the button was pressed down, the voice could not be heard at the other end, but when it was up, it could. "It will be difficult," she thought to herself. "I must keep calm, think of the right words, and not pause for a moment. But I believe that I can do it. I must do it." And at that minute she heard Dick Windyford's voice at the other end of the line. Alex took a deep breath. Then she spoke. "Mrs. Martin speaking, from Philomel Cottage. Please come," she pushed the button, "tomorrow morning with a good cut of lamb for 2 people. Button up. It's very important. Button down. Thank you so much, Mr. Hexworthy. I hope that you don't mind me ringing up so late, but the meat is really a matter of," button up, "life or death." Button down. "Very well, tomorrow morning." Button up. "As soon as possible." She replaced the receiver and faced her husband, breathing hard.
"So that's how you talk to your butcher, is it?" said Gerald.
"It's a woman's touch," said Alex, lightly. She was shaking with excitement. He had suspected nothing. Dick would come, even if he didn't understand. She walked into the sitting room and switched on the light. Gerald followed her.
"You seem to be in very high spirits now," he said, watching her with interest.
"Yes," said Alex. "My headache's gone." She sat down in her usual seat and smiled at her husband as he sank into his own chair opposite her. She was saved. It was only 25 minutes past 8. Dick would arrive long before 9 o'clock.
"I didn't like the coffee that you gave me very much," Gerald complained. "It tasted very bitter."
"It's a new kind that I was trying. We won't have it again if you don't like it, dear." Alex picked up some sewing. Gerald read a few pages of his book. Then he looked up at the clock and put it away.
8:30. It's time to go downstairs and start work."
The sewing slipped from Alex's fingers. "Oh, not yet. Let's wait until 9 o'clock.
"No, my girl, 8:30. That's the time that I fixed. You'll be able to go to bed earlier."
"But I'd rather wait until 9.
"You know that when I fix a time, I always keep to it. Come along, Alex. I'm not going to wait a minute longer."
Alex looked up at him. His hands were shaking, and his eyes shining with excitement, and his tongue kept moving across his dry lips. He no longer tried to hide his eagerness. Alex thought, It's true. He can't wait. He really is crazy. He seized her by the shoulder and pulled her to her feet. "Come on, my girl, or I'll carry you there." He spoke brightly, but there was a power in his voice that was terrible. With a great effort, she pushed him away and pressed herself back against the wall. She was helpless. She couldn't get away. She couldn't do anything. And he was coming towards her. "Now, Alex—" "No, no!" she cried out loud, trying hopelessly to keep him away with her hands. "Gerald, stop! There's something I've got to tell you. Something important." He did stop. "Important?" he said with interest. Then a look of anger appeared on his face. "A former lover, I suppose?" "No," said Alex. "Something else. I expect that you'd call it— yes, you'd call it a crime." She immediately saw that she had said the right thing. His attention was held. As soon as she realized this, her courage returned to her. She felt that she was in control of the situation again. "You'd better sit down again," she said quietly. She herself crossed the room to her old chair and sat down. She even bent down and picked up her sewing. But behind her calmness, she was feverishly inventing a story that would hold his interest until help arrived. "I told you," she said slowly, "that I had been a secretary for 15 years. That was not completely true. I was not a secretary for all of that time. When I was 22, I met a man, a fairly old man, with a little property. He fell in love with me and asked me to marry him. I accepted. We were married." She paused. "I persuaded him to insure his life in my name." She saw a sudden look of interest appear on her husband's face, and she went on with increased confidence. "During the war, I worked for a time in a hospital. There, I handled all kinds of rare poisons." There was no doubt that Gerald was extremely interested now. A murderer is sure to have an interest in murder. She had taken a chance on that, and succeeded. She looked quickly at the clock. It was 25 minutes to 9. "There is one poison. It is a little white powder, of which just a very small amount causes death. You know something about poisons, perhaps?" She put the question with some anxiety. If he did, she would have to be careful. "No," said Gerald. "I know very little about them." She was greatly relieved. "You have probably heard of a poison called hyoscine. The poison that I am speaking of acts in the same sort of way, but afterwards it is impossible to find any sign of it in the body. A doctor would believe that the heart had failed. I stole a small quantity of this poison and kept it." She stopped. "Go on," said Gerald. "No, I'm afraid. I can't tell you. Another time." "Now," he said impatiently. "I want to hear." "We'd been married for a month. I was very good to my old husband, and since he praised me to all the neighbours, everyone knew what a gentle wife I was. I made his coffee every evening, and one evening, when we were alone together, I put a little of the poison in his cup. Alex paused and carefully re-threaded her needle. She had never acted in her life, but at this moment she was as good as the greatest actress in the world. She was actually living the part of a pitiless poisoner. It was very peaceful. I sat watching him. Once he coughed a little and said that he wanted air. I opened the window. Then he said that he could not move from his chair. In the end, he died. She stopped, smiling. It was 9:15. Surely they would come soon. "How much," said Gerald, "did he insure his life for?" "About £2,000. I used it unwisely and lost it. I went back to my office work, but I never meant to stay there long. Then I met another man. He didn't know that I'd been married before. He was a younger man, quite good-looking, and he had quite a bit of money. We were married quietly in Sussex. He didn't want to insure his life, but of course his money would come to me if he died. He liked me to make his coffee just as my first husband had done." Alex smiled thoughtfully and added simply, "I make very good coffee." Then she went on. "I had several friends in the village where we were living. They were very sorry for me when my husband died, suddenly, of heart failure, one evening, after dinner. I didn't really like the doctor. I don't think that he suspected me, but he was certainly very surprised at my husband's sudden death. This time I received about £4,000, and this time I saved it. Then, you see—" But she was interrupted. Gerald Martin was pointing at her with one shaking hand and holding his throat with the other. "The coffee! It was the coffee!" She looked at him in surprise. "I understand now why it was bitter. You devil! You poisoned me!" His hands seized the arms of the chair. He was ready to jump on her. Alex moved away from him to stand by the fireplace. She was thoroughly frightened again. She opened her lips to tell him the truth, and then paused. In another minute he would attack her. She looked at him steadily and with authority. "Yes," she said, "I've poisoned you. Already the poison is working. At this moment, you can't move from your chair. You can't move." If she could keep him there, even for a few minutes. Ah, what was that? She heard footsteps on the road. She heard the noise of the garden gate, then footsteps on the path outside, and the outer door opening. "You can't move," she said again. Then she slipped past him and rushed from the room to fall, fainting, into Dick Windford's arms. "Good heavens! Alex!" he cried. Then he turned to the man with him, a tall, strong policeman. "Go and see what's been happening in that room." He laid Alex down carefully in a chair and bent over her.
My little girl, he said softly. My poor little girl. What have they been doing to you? Her eyelids moved once, and her lips just whispered his name. The policeman returned and touched Dick on the arm. There's nothing in that room, sir, except a man sitting in a chair. It looks as if he'd had some kind of bad shock and... Yes? Well, sir, he's dead. They were surprised suddenly to hear Alex's voice. And in the end, she said, as if she was in a dream, he died. End of CD 2.
The Witness for the Prosecution by Agatha Cristie. Mr. Mayherne adjusted his pince-nez and cleared his throat with a little dry-as-dust cough that was wholly typical of him. Then he looked again at the man opposite him, the man charged with willful murder. Mr. Mayherne was a small man, precise in manner, neatly, not to say foppishly dressed, with a pair of very shrewd and piercing grey eyes. By no means a fool. Indeed, as a solicitor, Mr. Mayherne's reputation stood very high. His voice, when he spoke to his client, was dry, but not unsympathetic. I must impress upon you again that you are in very grave danger, and that the utmost frankness is necessary. Leonard Vole, who had been staring in a dazed fashion at the blank wall in front of him, transferred his glance to the solicitor. I know, he said hopelessly. You keep telling me so, but I can't seem to realize yet that I'm charged with murder. Murder? And such a dastardly crime, too. Mr. Mayherne was practical, not emotional. He coughed again, took off his pince-nez, polished them carefully, and replaced them on his nose. Then he said, Yes, yes, yes. Now, my dear Mr. Vole, we're going to make a determined effort to get you off, and we shall succeed. We shall succeed. But I must have all the facts. I must know just how damaging the case against you is likely to be. Then we can fix upon the best line of defense. Still, the young man looked at him in the same dazed, hopeless fashion. To Mr. Mayherne the case had seemed black enough, and the guilt of the prisoner assured. Now, for the first time, he felt a doubt. You think I'm guilty? Said Leonard Vole in a low voice. But by God, I swear I'm not. It looks pretty black against me, I know that. I'm like a man caught in a net, the meshes of it all round me, entangling me whichever way I turn. But I didn't do it, Mr. Mayherne. I didn't do it. In such a position, a man was bound to protest his innocence. Mr. Mayherne knew that. Yet, in spite of himself, he was impressed. It might be, after all, that Leonard Vole was innocent. You are right, Mr. Vole, he said gravely. The case does look very black against you. Nevertheless, I accept your assurance. Now, let us get to the facts. I want you to tell me, in your own words, exactly how you came to make the acquaintance of Miss Emily French. It was one day in Oxford Street. I saw an elderly lady crossing the road. She was carrying a lot of parcels. In the middle of the street, she dropped them, tried to recover them, found a bus was almost on top of her, and just managed to reach the curb safely, dazed and bewildered by people having shouted at her. I recovered her parcels, wiped the mud off them as best I could, retied the string of one, and returned them to her. There was no question of your having saved her life? Oh, dear me, no. All I did was to perform a common act of courtesy. She was extremely grateful, thanked me warmly, and said something about my manners not being those of most of the younger generation. I can't remember the exact words. Then I lifted my hat and went on. I never expected to see her again. But life is full of coincidences. That very evening I came across her at a party at a friend's house. She recognized me at once and asked that I should be introduced to her. I then found out that she was a Miss Emily French and that she lived at Cricklewood. I talked to her for some time. She was, I imagine, an old lady who took sudden and violent fancies to people. She took one to me on the strength of a perfectly simple action which anyone might have performed. On leaving, she shook me warmly by the hand and asked me to come and see her. I replied, of course, that I should be very pleased to do so, and then she urged me to name a day. I did not want particularly to go, but it would have seemed churlish to refuse, so I fixed on the following Saturday. After she had gone, I learned something about her from my friends. That she was rich, eccentric, lived alone with one maid, and owned no less than 8 cats. I see, said Mr. Mayherne. The question of her being well off came up as early as that? If you mean that I inquired, began Leonard Vole hotly, but Mr. Mayherne stilled him with a gesture. I have to look at the case as it will be presented by the other side. An ordinary observer would not have supposed Miss French to be a lady of means. She lived poorly, almost humbly. Unless you had been told the contrary, you would, in all probability, have considered her to be in poor circumstances, at any rate, to begin with. Who was it, exactly, who told you that she was well off? My friend, George Harvey, at whose house the party took place. Is he likely to remember having done so? I really don't know. Of course, it is some time ago now. Quite so, Mr. Vole. You see, the first aim of the prosecution will be to establish that you were in low water financially. That is true, is it not? Leonard Vole flushed. Yes, he said in a low voice. I'd been having a run of infernal bad luck just then. Quite so, said Mr. Mayherne again. That being, as I say, in low water financially, you met this rich old lady and cultivated her acquaintance assiduously. Now, if we are in a position to say that you had no idea she was well off, and that you visited her out of pure kindness of heart, which is the case, I dare say. I am not disputing the point. I am looking at it from the outside point of view. A great deal depends on the memory of Mr. Harvey. Is he likely to remember that conversation, or is he not? Could he be confused by counsel into believing that it took place later? Leonard Vole reflected for some minutes. Then he said steadily enough, but with a rather pale face. I do not think that line would be successful, Mr. Mayherne. Several of those present heard his remark, and 1 or 2 of them chaffed me about my conquest of a rich old lady. The solicitor endeavored to hide his disappointment with a wave of the hand. Unfortunate, he said. But I congratulate you upon your plain speaking, Mr. Vole. It is to you I look to guide me. Your judgment is quite right. To persist in the line I spoke of would have been disastrous. We must leave that point. You made the acquaintance of Miss French. You called upon her. The acquaintanceship progressed. We want a clear reason for all this. Why did you, A young man of 33, good-looking, fond of sport, popular with your friends, devote so much of your time to an elderly woman with whom you could hardly have anything in common." Leonard Vole flung out his hands in a nervous gesture. "I can't tell you. I really can't tell you. After the first visit, she pressed me to come again, spoke of being lonely and unhappy. She made it difficult for me to refuse. She showed so plainly her fondness and affection for me that I was placed in an awkward position. You see, Mr. Mayherne, I've got a weak nature. I drift. I'm one of those people who can't say no. And believe me or not, as you like, after the third or fourth visit I paid her, I found myself getting genuinely fond of the old thing. My mother died when I was young. An aunt brought me up, and she, too, died before I was 15. If I told you that I genuinely enjoyed being mothered and pampered, I dare say you'd only laugh." Mr. Mayherne did not laugh. Instead, he took off his pince-nez again and polished them, a sign with him that he was thinking deeply. "I accept your explanation, Mr. Vole," he said at last. "I believe it to be psychologically probable. Whether a jury would take that view of it is another matter. Please continue your narrative. When was it that Miss French first asked you to look into her business affairs?" "After my third or fourth visit to her. She understood very little of money matters, and was worried about some investments." Mr. Mayherne looked up sharply. "Be careful, Mr. Vole. The maid, Janet Mackenzie, declares that her mistress was a good woman of business and transacted all her own affairs, and this is borne out by the testimony of her bankers." "I can't help that," said Vole earnestly. "That's what she said to me." Mr. Mayherne looked at him for a moment or two in silence. Though he had no intention of saying so, his belief in Leonard Vole's innocence was at that moment strengthened. He knew something of the mentality of elderly ladies. He saw Miss French, infatuated with the good-looking young man, hunting about